A shotgun wedding, a lawless town, a woman no one wanted, and a drifter who'd rather die than settle down. When Ethan Cole threw his last punch in Dry Hollow, he never imagined the sheriff would give him a choice worse than prison. Marry Mara Whitlock, the forgotten ranch woman at the edge of town, or rot behind bars for the rest of his days. One decision, one woman, one ranch on the verge of collapse. What started as survival became something far more dangerous, a bond neither of them asked for, but both would fight to keep. Stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The sun beat down on Dry Hollow like a curse that wouldn't lift, baking the dirt streets into cracked clay and turning every breath into a labor. The town itself was little more than a collection of weathered buildings clinging to existence in the middle of nowhere. A saloon with peeling paint, a general store that smelled of dust and desperation, a sheriff's office that looked more like a shack than a symbol of law. This was the kind of place men passed through, not the kind they stayed in. And Ethan Cole had every intention of being gone by sundown. He'd ridden into Dry Hollow 3 days prior with nothing but a stolen horse, a worn revolver, and a reputation that preceded him like smoke before fire. Ethan was a drifter in every sense, 32 years old, lean and hard from years on the move, with eyes the color of storm clouds and a jaw that looked like it had been carved from granite. He didn't talk much, didn't smile much, and sure as hell didn't settle much. Towns like this were all the same to him. A place to water his horse, grab a meal, maybe play a hand of cards before the road called him onward. But Dry Hollow had other plans. It started in the saloon on his third night. The Long Shot was the only drinking hole in town, a dim cavern of smoke and stale whiskey where men gambled away what little they had and women with tired eyes served drinks with forced smiles. Ethan sat in the corner, nursing a glass of rotgut, watching the room with the practiced awareness of a man who'd learned early that trouble usually announced itself before it arrived. The trouble that night came in the form of Clayton Wells, a local rancher's son with more arrogance than sense and a reputation for starting fights he couldn't finish. Clayton was drunk, loud, and spoiling for a confrontation with the mysterious stranger who'd been keeping to himself all week. "You," Clayton slurred, pointing a wavering finger at Ethan, "you're that drifter been sniffing around town. Think you're too good to talk to folks?" Ethan didn't even look up. "Not interested." "I'm talking to you." Clayton's voice rose, drawing attention from the other patrons. His two friends flanked him, grinning with the kind of stupid courage that came from cheap liquor and bad judgment. "And I'm ignoring you," Ethan replied calmly, taking another sip of his drink. "Walk away while you still can." That was all the provocation Clayton needed. He lurched forward, swinging wildly. Ethan moved with the fluid efficiency of someone who'd been in more fights than he could count, ducking the clumsy punch, rising smoothly, and driving his fist into Clayton's jaw with a crack that echoed through the suddenly silent saloon. Clayton dropped like a sack of grain. His friends attacked in a rush of fury and alcohol. Ethan took the first one down with a knee to the gut and an elbow to the back of the head. The second managed to land a solid punch to Ethan's ribs before Ethan grabbed a whiskey bottle off the nearest table and brought it down on the man's shoulder, not hard enough to shatter bone, but hard enough to end the fight. The whole thing was over in less than 30 seconds. Ethan stood over the three groaning men, breathing hard, his knuckles split and bleeding. The saloon watched in stunned silence. Then the door crashed open and Sheriff Henry Dalton stormed in, shotgun in hand, gray mustache bristling with fury. "What in the hell is going on here?" "Self-defense," Ethan said flatly, wiping blood from his lip. "They started it." "That's Clayton Wells you just laid out," the sheriff growled. "His daddy owns half the cattle in this county. You just made yourself a world of trouble, son. Didn't ask for it. Don't matter what you asked for. What matters is you got it." Sheriff Dalton leveled the shotgun at Ethan's chest. "You're coming with me." Ethan could have run. Should have run, probably. But something in him was tired. Tired of running, tired of fighting, tired of the endless empty road stretching out before him with nothing at the end of it. So he raised his hands and let himself be led to the cramped cell in the back of the sheriff's office, the iron door clanging shut with a finality that echoed in his chest. He spent the night on a thin cot, staring at the ceiling, wondering how long they'd keep him locked up. In a town like this, justice was negotiable. If the Wells family wanted blood, they'd probably get it. If they wanted money, well, Ethan didn't have any, which left prison, or worse. Morning came with the sound of boots on wood and voices in heated conversation. Ethan sat up, running a hand through his dark hair, and listened. "Can't just hang him, Byron," Sheriff Dalton was saying. "He defended himself. Half the saloon saw it. My boy's jaw is broke." That was Byron Wells, Clayton's father, and he sounded like a man used to getting his way. "That drifter don't belong here. He needs to pay." "Then what do you suggest? Prison? For how long?" There was a pause, then another voice, older, raspier. "Maybe there's another way." Ethan recognized that voice. Silas Thorne, the town's self-appointed mayor and the man who really ran Dry Hollow. If Silas was involved, things were about to get complicated. "What are you thinking, Silas?" the sheriff asked warily. "We got ourselves a problem in this town," Silas said slowly. "Mara Whitlock's ranch is falling apart. She can't manage it alone, and if it goes under, we lose the only water access on the north side. Whole town suffers." "What's that got to do with everything?" Silas interrupted. "We need a man out there, someone strong, someone capable, someone with nothing to lose." Ethan felt a cold knot form in his stomach. "You want me to send him to work the ranch?" Sheriff Dalton sounded skeptical. "As what? A hired hand?" "As a husband," Silas said flatly. The silence that followed was deafening. "You've lost your mind," Byron Wells finally sputtered. "You want this criminal to marry Mara Whitlock? That's practical." Silas cut him off. "Mara needs help. She's too proud to ask and too stubborn to accept charity. But if she's got a husband, even one she didn't choose, then by law he's bound to stay and work that land. And the drifter gets to stay out of prison. Everybody wins." "Except Mara," the sheriff muttered. "Mara does what's best for this town. Same as the rest of us. Always has." Silas's voice hardened. "Bring him out. Let's see if he's smart enough to take the deal." The door to the cell area opened and Sheriff Dalton appeared, looking older and more tired than he had the night before. "On your feet, Cole. You got a choice to make." They brought him out into the main office where Byron Wells glared at him with undisguised hatred and Silas Thorne studied him with cold calculation. The old man was thin as a rail, dressed in black like he was perpetually ready for a funeral, with eyes that had seen too much and given too little. "Ethan Cole," Silas said, as if testing the name. "You're a long way from anywhere, aren't you?" "Was just passing through," Ethan replied evenly. "Well, your passing through days are over. Here's your situation. Byron here wants you locked up for breaking his boy's jaw. Prison time, maybe a year, maybe 5. Depends on how the judge feels, but prison's a waste, far as I'm concerned. So I'm offering you an alternative." "I'm listening." "There's a woman in this town, Mara Whitlock. Runs a ranch about 5 miles north. Good land, good water, but she's drowning in work and debt. Needs a husband to help her keep it running. You marry her, work the ranch, and I'll make sure no charges are filed. You refuse, and you sit in that cell until the circuit judge comes through, which could be 2 months, could be 6. Ethan stared at him. "You're serious?" "As a hanging." "And what does this woman think about being married off to a stranger?" "She'll do what needs doing, same as you." Silas leaned forward. "But make no mistake, Cole, this ain't a request. This is survival. For you, for her, for this whole damn town. So what's it gonna be? Prison or a purpose?" Ethan looked from Silas to the sheriff to Byron Wells, whose face was still twisted with rage. He thought about the cell behind him, the months stretching into years, the slow rot of confinement. He thought about the endless road, the towns that all looked the same, the emptiness that followed him like a shadow. And he thought about a woman he'd never met, being forced into a marriage she didn't want with a man she'd never chosen. "Let me meet her first," Ethan said quietly. Silas smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Not how this works. You decide now or you go back in that cell. Clock's ticking, Cole." Ethan closed his eyes, took a breath, opened them again. "Fine," he said. "I'll marry her." The Whitlock Ranch sat at the end of a rutted dirt road that wound through scrubland and past broken fences. The house itself was a weathered 2-story structure with peeling paint and a sagging porch, surrounded by outbuildings in various states of disrepair. A barn leaned slightly to one side, as if considering whether to collapse. Corrals stood empty except for a single horse and a handful of cattle that looked too thin. It was, Ethan thought, as the wagon carrying him and Sheriff Dalton pulled up, the physical embodiment of barely holding on. "She doesn't know we're coming," the sheriff said quietly as they climbed down. "Silas sent word this morning, but I don't know if she got it yet." "This keeps getting better," Ethan muttered. The front door opened before they reached the porch. The woman who emerged was not what Ethan had expected. Mara Whitlock was in her late 20s, he guessed, with dark hair pulled back in a practical braid and eyes the color of the earth after rain. She wore men's work clothes, trousers, a worn shirt, boots caked with mud, and there was a rifle in her hands, held with the easy competence of someone who knew how to use it. She wasn't beautiful in the conventional sense. Her face was too weathered, her hands too calloused, her frame too lean from hard work and harder years. But there was something in the set of her jaw, the steadiness of her gaze, that commanded attention. This was not a woman who bent easily. "Sheriff," she said, her voice flat, "I got Silas's letter." "Mara, Save it!" She looked at Ethan, studying him with the same dispassionate assessment she might give a horse she was considering buying. "This him?" "This is Ethan Cole, yes. I know this ain't—" "You know what this is?" Mara interrupted, still looking at Ethan. "This is the town deciding what's best for me without asking. Again." She lowered the rifle slightly. "How much of this was your idea, Drifter?" "None of it," Ethan said honestly. "I was given a choice between this and prison." "So you picked me. Lucky me." Her tone was bitter, but not angry, just tired, deeply tired. "You got any experience with ranch work?" "Some." "Some," she repeated. "Can you fix a fence?" "Yes." "Men tack, shoe a horse, birth a calf, break a stallion, dig a well, repair a roof?" "Most of that, yes." She studied him a moment longer, then looked at the sheriff. "He gonna hurt me, Henry?" Sheriff Dalton seemed taken aback. No, I don't believe so. He's rough, but he ain't mean, not like that." "Not like that," Mara echoed. She seemed to be weighing something in her mind, calculations running behind those earth-colored eyes. Finally, she sighed. "All right, I'll do it." "Mara, you don't have to—" "Yes, I do." She looked at Ethan again. "And so does he. Might as well stop pretending we got choices we don't have." She stepped back from the doorway. "Come inside, we'll do this proper." The interior of the house was sparse but clean. A simple kitchen with a wood stove, a sitting area with worn furniture, stairs leading up to what Ethan assumed were bedrooms. Everything spoke of functionality over comfort, necessity over luxury. Mara gestured to the kitchen table. "Sit." "Sheriff, you brought the papers?" "Right here." Dalton produced a folded document from his coat. "Marriage certificate. You both sign, I witness, and it's done." "That's simple," Mara said, without humor. She sat across from Ethan, the table between them like a barrier. "Before we do this, we need to understand each other." "I'm listening," Ethan said. "This ain't a real marriage. Not in any way that matters. You're here to work the ranch, keep it running. In exchange, you get a roof, food, and no prison time. That's the deal. Nothing more." "Understood." "I sleep upstairs, you sleep in the barn loft. There's a cot out there. It ain't comfortable, but it's dry. You work dawn to dusk, same as me. You do your share, I do mine. We don't have to like each other, but we have to be civil. Clear?" "Clear." "One more thing." Mara's eyes hardened. "You ever raise a hand to me, I'll shoot you dead and bury you where no one will find you. Henry knows I mean it." Sheriff Dalton nodded solemnly. "She does." Ethan held her gaze. "I don't hit women. Never have. Never will." "Good." Mara reached for the pen lying on the table. "Then let's get this over with." She signed her name in quick, practiced strokes. Mara Jane Whitlock. Pushed the paper to Ethan. He picked up the pen, hesitated for just a heartbeat, then signed. Ethan Cole. Sheriff Dalton witnessed, added his signature, and dated it. "There. You're married." He stood, clearly eager to leave. "Mara, you need anything, I'll manage, Henry. I always do." After the sheriff left, the silence in the house was profound. Ethan and Mara sat across from each other, strangers bound by ink and circumstance, neither quite sure what to do next. Finally, Mara stood. "I'll show you the barn. Get you settled. Work starts at dawn." "Mara," Ethan began, then stopped, not sure what he'd been about to say. She paused in the doorway. "What?" "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "For all of this. You deserved better." For a moment, something shifted in her expression, a crack in the armor, quickly sealed. "We both did," she said. Then she was gone, leaving Ethan alone in the house that was now, somehow, his home. The barn loft was exactly as advertised. A cot, a thin blanket, and nothing else. Ethan lay on his back that first night, staring at the rafters, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling around him. Below, the horse shifted in its stall. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. He thought about the road he'd left behind, the towns he'd never see again, the freedom he'd traded for a bed and 3 meals. It felt less like a new beginning and more like a slow death, a different kind of prison, just with wider walls. But then he thought about Mara's eyes when she'd asked if he would hurt her, the weariness in her voice when she'd said we both deserved better. And he realized they were both prisoners here, both trapped by circumstances neither had chosen. Maybe that was enough. Maybe 2 prisoners could make something that resembled survival, if not happiness. Or maybe this was just the beginning of a long, slow mistake. He closed his eyes and waited for morning. Dawn came too early and too bright. Ethan woke to the sound of someone, Mara, presumably, already moving around outside. He dressed quickly, splashed cold water on his face from the pump near the barn, and found her in the corral checking the fence posts. "You're up," she said without looking at him. "Good. Coffee's in the house, but don't expect it every morning. Today we're checking the fence line around the north pasture. It's 3 miles, mostly on foot. You'll want to eat something first." They worked in near silence for the next several hours, walking the perimeter of the property, identifying posts that needed replacing and wire that needed mending. Mara moved with the efficiency of someone who'd done this work 1,000 times, and Ethan found himself struggling to keep up, not physically, but mentally, trying to learn the specific rhythms and requirements of this particular land. "This was your father's place?" he asked during a brief rest. "And his father's before him," Mara replied, taking a long drink from her canteen. "Whitlocks have worked this land for 40 years. Built it from nothing." She gazed out over the scrubland. "Now it's dying, and I don't know how to save it." "What happened?" "Father died 3 years back. Mother was already gone. I tried hiring hands, but nobody wants to work for a woman, and I can't pay what the bigger ranches do. Slowly but surely, everything's falling apart." She looked at him. "That's where you come in." "Because Silas Thorne decided you needed a husband." "Because Silas Thorne decided the town needs this ranch," Mara corrected. "I'm just the means to an end, same as you." They worked until sunset, then returned to the house exhausted and dirty. Mara cooked a simple meal, beans, bread, coffee, and they ate in that same heavy silence. Ethan found himself watching her when she wasn't looking, trying to understand the woman he'd been shackled to. She caught him staring once. "What?" "Just trying to figure you out." "Don't bother. I'm not complicated. I work, I sleep, I survive. That's all there is." "That's not living." "Maybe not," Mara said, standing to clear the dishes. "But it's what I got. And now it's what you got too. Better get used to it." That night, lying in the loft, Ethan wondered if she was right. Maybe this was all there was, work and survival and the slow grind of days bleeding into years. Maybe he should stop hoping for anything more. But somewhere in the darkness, he heard Mara moving around the house below, and he found himself hoping anyway. The first week passed in a blur of backbreaking labor. Ethan threw himself into the work with a single-minded intensity, driven by a combination of obligation and something he couldn't quite name. He repaired fences, mended tack, cleared brush, hauled water, mucked stalls. His hands blistered, then calloused. His back ached. His muscles screamed. Mara worked beside him, matching him hour for hour, task for task. She never complained, never asked for help, never showed weakness. It was impressive and infuriating in equal measure. Ethan found himself both admiring her resilience and frustrated by her refusal to acknowledge that she didn't have to carry everything alone anymore. "You could let me handle some of this," he said on the fifth day, watching her struggle with a post that was clearly too heavy for one person. "I've been handling it just fine," she grunted, finally getting the post into position. "That's not what I meant."
Then what did you mean?" "I meant," Ethan paused, choosing his words carefully. "I meant you don't have to prove anything. Not to me, anyway." Mara wiped sweat from her forehead, leaving a streak of dirt. "Everything in my life I've had to prove. Had to prove I could run this place after Father died. Had to prove I could handle the men who thought they could take advantage. Had to prove I deserved to keep this land when the bank wanted to foreclose. You think I'm going to stop now?" "No," Ethan admitted. "I guess you're not." Something that might have been the ghost of a smile crossed her face. "Then we understand each other." On the 8th day, the first crack appeared in their careful distance. Ethan was in the barn, working on a saddle that had seen better days, when Mara appeared in the doorway carrying a basket. "Brought you lunch?" she said, setting it down on a bale of hay. "Figured you shouldn't have to come all the way back to the house." "That's considerate, thanks," she shrugged. "Don't read into it, just practical." But as she turned to leave, Ethan called after her. "Mara?" "Yeah?" "Why did you really agree to this? You could have said no." She was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than he'd heard it before. "Because I'm tired, Ethan. Tired of doing this alone. Tired of being invisible to everyone in that town until they need something from me. Tired of—" She trailed off, then shook her head. "It doesn't matter. Point is, you're here, I'm here, and we make it work or we both lose everything. So that's what we'll do." "Make it work," Ethan repeated. "Make it work," Mara confirmed. Then she was gone, leaving him alone with his thoughts and a sandwich he barely tasted. By the end of the second week, a routine had established itself. They worked together but separately, spoke when necessary but not socially, maintained the careful boundaries they'd set. It was functional, if not comfortable. It was survival, if not living. And then the storm came. It started as a dark line on the western horizon, visible just after midday. Mara spotted it first, her expression immediately tightening. "That's bad," she said quietly. "Really bad. We need to secure everything. Now." They moved with urgent efficiency, bringing tools into the barn, reinforcing the chicken coop, moving the cattle to the more sheltered eastern pasture. The wind picked up, carrying with it the smell of rain and ozone. Thunder rumbled in the distance, growing closer. "The barn," Mara said suddenly, looking at the structure with worried eyes. "The roof's been weak on the south corner. If this storm is as bad as it looks—" "We'll deal with it if we have to," Ethan said. "Get inside the house." "I'll finish here." "The hell you will. This is my ranch." "Mara, don't argue with me, Cole. We do this together or not at all." They were still securing the barn doors when the rain hit. Not gradually, but all at once, a wall of water that turned the world into a gray blur. Lightning cracked across the sky, close enough that Ethan felt his hair stand on end. The wind howled like something alive and angry. "Inside!" Mara shouted over the roar. "We have to—" A sound like tearing fabric, magnified 100 times. Ethan looked up just in time to see a section of the barn roof lift, twist, and tear away into the storm. Rain poured through the opening, and worse, he could see the rest of the structure beginning to sway. "The horse!" Mara screamed. She was already running toward the barn, toward the collapsing section where the single horse was tied in its stall, eyes rolling white with terror. "Mara, no!" Ethan lunged after her, but she was faster, driven by desperation and something deeper. Love, maybe, or duty, or the simple refusal to lose one more thing to this unforgiving land. She reached the stall as another support beam groaned and cracked. Ethan saw her fumbling with the lead rope, saw the horse rearing, saw the roof beginning its final, fatal collapse. He didn't think, just moved, grabbed Mara around the waist and pulled her back with all his strength just as the beam came down where she'd been standing a heartbeat before. The horse broke free in the chaos, bolting past them toward safety. Ethan wrapped himself around Mara and rolled, covering her body with his, as debris rained down around them. Then, stillness, ringing ears,
The continued roar of rain and wind, but the worst of the collapse was over. They were pressed against the far wall of the barn, in the narrow space that had saved their lives. Ethan's back was on fire. Something had hit him, hard, but Mara was underneath him, breathing, alive, intact. "You idiot," she gasped. "You stupid, reckless—" "You're welcome," Ethan managed, trying to catch his breath. She shoved at him weakly. "Get off me. You're heavy." He rolled to the side, wincing as pain lanced through his shoulder. Mara sat up, taking stock of the damage. The barn was a mess. Half the roof gone, one wall partially collapsed, equipment scattered everywhere. But the horse was safe, visible through the opening, already calming in the rain. Mara looked at Ethan, really looked at him, for the first time since they'd met. There was something raw in her expression, something vulnerable. "You followed me in," she said quietly. "Yes." "Why?" "Because you were in danger. We barely know each other." "Doesn't matter." She reached out, hesitant, and touched his shoulder where his shirt was torn and blood was starting to seep through. "You're hurt." "I'll live." "Ethan, it's fine, Mara. Really." He met her eyes. "I wasn't going to let you do that alone." Something shifted between them in that moment. Not love, not yet, but the first fragile recognition that maybe, just maybe, they were more than strangers forced together by circumstance. Maybe they were something that could become a team if they let it. Mara nodded slowly. "We should get you to the house. That needs tending." They made their way through the dying storm, supporting each other. Two people who'd gone into that barn as reluctant partners and come out as something else entirely. Something that might eventually matter. In the house, Mara cleaned and bandaged Ethan's wound with practiced hands while he sat shirtless in the kitchen, trying not to wince. Her touch was surprisingly gentle. "This'll scar," she said quietly. "Won't be my first." "No, I imagine not." She finished wrapping the bandage. "You saved my life today. You would have done the same." "Maybe, maybe not." She stepped back, studying him. "I need to know something. Why did you really agree to this? The marriage. Was it just to avoid prison, or was there something else?" Ethan considered lying, considered giving her an easy answer, but after what they'd just been through, she deserved the truth. "I was tired," he said finally. "Tired of running, tired of being alone, tired of the road going nowhere. When Silas made his offer, part of me saw a chance to, I don't know, stop. Find something solid, even if it wasn't what I'd have chosen." He met her eyes. "That honest enough for you?" "Yeah," Mara said softly. "Yeah, it is." That night, for the first time since Ethan had arrived, they sat together after dinner, not working, not planning, just sitting. The rain had stopped, leaving the world washed clean and quiet. They didn't talk much, but the silence felt different now. Less like a wall, more like a shared space they were both learning to inhabit. And when Ethan walked back to the barn loft, moving carefully because of his injured shoulder, he found that Mara had been there before him. The thin blanket had been replaced with a thicker one, and there was a pillow that hadn't been there before. Small gestures, but they meant something. In the house, Mara stood at her bedroom window, watching the barn. She thought about the way Ethan had covered her body with his own, the way he'd risked himself without hesitation for a woman who'd shown him nothing but cold practicality. She thought about the look in his eyes when he'd said he was tired of running. She was tired too. Tired of being alone, tired of carrying everything herself. Tired of the walls she'd built to keep herself safe, but that had also kept her isolated. Maybe, just maybe, those walls could start to come down. Not all at once, not easily, but slowly, carefully, one day at a time. As she finally turned away from the window and climbed into bed, Mara allowed herself something she hadn't permitted in years. Hope. Not for love, not yet, but for the possibility of partnership, of not being alone, of someone staying. And in the barn loft, Ethan lay beneath the new blanket and felt the same fragile hope taking root. He'd spent years running from commitment, from connection, from anything that might tie him down. But lying there in the darkness, his shoulder aching from a wound earned saving someone else, he found himself thinking that maybe being tied to something, to someone, wasn't the prison he'd always imagined. Maybe it was the opposite. Maybe it was freedom. The wind whispered through the broken barn, and somewhere in the night, both Ethan and Mara dreamed of a future that neither had dared to imagine when they'd signed their names on that marriage certificate. A future where a forced bond might become something chosen, where two broken people might build something whole. It would take time. It would take work. It would take trust that neither of them gave easily. But for the first time, it felt possible. And in a place like Dry Hollow, where hope was as scarce as water in a drought, possible was enough. The days following the storm passed with a different rhythm. The destruction had been significant. The barn needed extensive repairs, fences were down in 3 sections, and equipment lay scattered across the property like discarded toys. But something else had changed too. Something harder to quantify, but impossible to ignore. Ethan and Mara worked side by side now, truly together rather than merely occupying the same space. The careful distance they'd maintained had narrowed, though neither acknowledged it directly. Small things shifted first, the way Mara would hand him tools without being asked, anticipating what he needed. The way Ethan started coffee in the mornings before she came downstairs, learning without instruction that she took it black and strong. The way their conversations, once clipped and functional, began to stretch longer over evening meals. 3 days after the storm, Ethan was on the barn roof at sunrise, stripping away damaged shingles. His shoulder still ached from where the beam had struck him, but the wound was clean and healing. Below, he could hear Mara working with the horse. Dancer, she'd told him the animal's name was, legacy from her father who'd claimed the mare could move like water flowing. "How's it looking up there?" Mara called up. Ethan surveyed the damage in the growing light. "Worse than I thought. We're going to need more materials than we have. Shingles, nails, at least 2 new support beams." "That means a trip to town." Her voice carried a note of reluctance. "I can go alone if you'd rather." There was a pause, then, "No, we'll both go. Be faster with 2 people loading the wagon, and I need to check in at the general store anyway. We owe them money, and Samuel Morrison's been patient long enough." An hour later, they were on the wagon heading toward Dry Hollow, Dancer hitched alongside to visit the farrier. The morning was cool and clear, the storm having scrubbed the air clean. Ethan handled the reins while Mara sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders occasionally brushed when the wagon hit ruts in the road. "You nervous about going back?" Mara asked after a while. "To town? Should I be? People talk, especially in a place like Dry Hollow. By now, everyone knows about our arrangement. They'll have opinions." "Let them." Mara glanced at him. "You really don't care what people think, do you?" "Haven't for a long time. Caring what people think is what gets you tied down to expectations you never agreed to." He paused, then added with a slight smile, "Present circumstances notwithstanding." She surprised him with a short laugh, the first he'd heard from her. "Fair point." They rode in companionable silence for another mile before Mara spoke again, her tone more serious. "Ethan, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest." "All right. Do you regret it? Agreeing to marry me?" He considered the question carefully, knowing she'd detect any false comfort. 2 weeks ago? Yeah, I regretted it. Felt like I'd traded one prison for another. He felt her stiffen beside him. But now? No. I don't regret it. Why not? Because I'm starting to think maybe this isn't a prison at all. Maybe it's just different. A different kind of life than I expected, but not necessarily a worse one. He looked at her. "You regret it?" "I thought I would," Mara admitted. "Thought I'd resent having you here, resent being forced into this. But you work hard, you don't complain, and you—" She trailed off. "I what?" "You see me," she said quietly. "Most people, especially men, they look right through me, like I'm furniture or an obstacle or just something to be managed. But you actually see me, and I don't know what to do with that." Ethan didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing, just let the words settle between them like seeds planted in uncertain ground. Dry Hollow looked the same as it had 2 weeks prior, dusty, tired, clinging to existence in the harsh land. But walking down the main street with Mara, Ethan felt the weight of eyes following them. Conversations stopped, heads turned. The town was watching, judging, speculating. At the general store, Samuel Morrison, a portly man with kind eyes and a merchant's careful diplomacy, greeted them with studied neutrality. "Mara, and you must be the new husband. Ethan Cole, isn't it? That's right. Well then, what can I do for you folks today? Mara handed him a list. Building supplies, storm damage, and I wanted to talk about the account. Account can wait, Morrison said, waving a hand.
I know you're good for it, always have been. He studied the list. This is going to cost you. You sure you need all this? Barn won't fix itself, Ethan said. Morrison nodded slowly, then began gathering supplies. While he worked, other customers drifted in and out, each finding an excuse to linger, to steal glances at the unlikely couple. Ethan could feel Mara growing tense beside him. Is it true you fought 3 men at once? A young woman asked suddenly, her eyes wide with curiosity.
Emily, that's none of your, Morrison began. It was a bar fight, Ethan said flatly. Nothing heroic about it. But you won. I didn't lose. There's a difference. An older man near the counter snorted. Heard you didn't have much choice after. Prison or marriage. Hell of a choice. Benjamin, Mara's voice carried a warning. I'm just saying what everyone's thinking, Mara. Town forced your hand same as his. Ain't right, no matter how you paint it. What's not right, Mara said coldly, is everyone discussing my personal business like it's public entertainment. We came here to buy supplies, not to be examined like curiosities. Now, Morrison interjected, clearly uncomfortable. Let's all just calm down. Mara, your order's ready. That'll be $42. Mara's face paled slightly. I was hoping to pay half now and half next month when... I'll cover it, Ethan said, reaching for the roll of bills he'd kept hidden in his saddlebag for emergencies. It was most of what he had left, but the look of relief on Mara's face made it worth it. Morrison accepted the money with a nod. Appreciate the business. You two need help loading? We can manage, Ethan said. Outside, as they loaded supplies into the wagon, Mara was quiet. Too quiet. Finally, she spoke without looking at him. You didn't have to do that. Buy supplies we need? Spend your money. That was everything you had, wasn't it? How did you... I'm not stupid, Ethan. I saw the way you counted it. That was your running money, wasn't it? The money you'd saved for when you decided to leave. He finished tying down a bundle of shingles before answering. Yeah, it was. So why did you spend it? Because the barn needs fixing and you need supplies? And what the hell am I saving it for anyway? I'm not running anymore. He finally met her eyes. This is home now. Might as well invest in it. Something in her expression softened. You keep surprising me, Cole. Good. Wouldn't want to be predictable. They were loading the last of the supplies when Sheriff Dalton approached, his expression grave. Mara, Ethan, got a minute? What's wrong, Henry? Mara asked. The sheriff glanced around, then lowered his voice. Had some trouble south of here last night. Caleb Rourke's gang hit the Patterson ranch. Stole 15 head of cattle, shot Patterson's hired man when he tried to stop them. Man's alive, but barely. Ethan felt his stomach tighten. He'd heard of Caleb Rourke. Most people west of the Mississippi had. The outlaw ran one of the most vicious gangs in the territory, known for brutality and for never leaving witnesses. Why are you telling us this? Mara's voice was steady, but Ethan could see her hands gripping the wagon rail. Because Patterson's place is 20 miles south. Yours is 15 miles north. Rourke's gang is working their way through the area, hitting isolated ranches. You two are vulnerable out there, understaffed, underdefended. I wanted you to know so you can take precautions. What kind of precautions? Ethan asked. Lock your doors. Keep weapons loaded and close. Don't go out after dark if you can help it. And if you see anything suspicious, riders you don't recognize, movement at night, you come to town immediately. Don't try to be heroes. How many men does Rourke have with him? Ethan pressed. Last count? 8, maybe 10. All of them killers. Dalton looked at Mara. I'm serious about this. Your ranch is isolated. If they decide to hit you, you won't be able to fight them off alone. We're not alone, Mara said quietly. Not anymore. The sheriff's eyes flicked to Ethan. One extra gun might not be enough. It'll have to be, Ethan said. We're not abandoning the ranch. I'm not asking you to abandon it. I'm asking you to be smart. We'll be careful, Mara promised. Thank you for the warning, Henry. The ride back to the ranch was subdued. The earlier ease between them had been replaced by a tension that had nothing to do with each other and everything to do with the threat now hanging over them.
You know how to shoot? Mara asked finally. I do. How well? Well enough. Ethan glanced at her. You? Father taught me when I was 12. I can hit what I aim at, if that's what you're asking. That's exactly what I'm asking. When they reached the ranch, they unloaded the supplies in grim silence. The property suddenly felt more exposed, more vulnerable. Ethan found himself scanning the horizon, looking for movement, for threats that might be watching even now. That evening, they took inventory of their defenses. Mara had her father's Winchester and a double-barrel shotgun. Ethan had his revolver. They had maybe 100 rounds of ammunition between them. Not exactly an arsenal, Ethan observed. No, Mara agreed, but it's what we have. She loaded the Winchester with practiced efficiency. We'll take shifts at night. Someone always awake, always watching. Mara, you can't function on half sleep. Neither can you. We share the load or we don't do it at all. That's how this works. He wanted to argue, but the stubborn set of her jaw told him it would be pointless. Fine, I'll take first watch tonight, midnight to dawn. I'll do dusk to midnight then. They maintained their watch rotation for 3 days without incident. The work on the barn continued, slower now because they were both exhausted, always listening, always alert. The easy partnership that had been developing took on a harder edge, less about growing closer and more about survival. On the 4th night, Ethan's watch passed without event until about 2 hours before dawn. He was sitting on the porch, Winchester across his lap, when Dancer whinnied nervously in the corral. A moment later, he heard it, the distant sound of hoofbeats, multiple riders, moving fast. He was through the door and up the stairs before conscious thought caught up with instinct. Mara, wake up, we've got company. She was on her feet instantly, grabbing the shotgun. How many? Can't tell yet. At least 3, maybe more. They positioned themselves in the darkened house, weapons ready, watching through windows as the riders approached. In the pale moonlight, Ethan counted 5 men, all armed, moving with the confidence of people who didn't expect resistance. They stopped about 50 yards from the house. One of them, a lean man with a scar bisecting his face, called out in a voice that carried mockery. Anyone home? We're just passing through. Thought we'd be neighborly. Ethan and Mara remained silent. Come on now, don't be unfriendly. We're looking for food, water, maybe a few head of cattle to keep us going. You share, we'll move on. Nobody has to get hurt. That's not how it works with Rourke's gang, Mara whispered. They take everything and kill anyone who sees them. The scarred man called out again, his tone hardening. I can see lights in that house. I know you're in there. Make this easy on yourselves. Ethan made a decision. He moved to the window, staying to the side, and called back. You're trespassing. Turn around and leave while you still can. The man laughed. Oh, we got ourselves a brave one. That you, Ethan Cole? Heard the town married you off to the Whitlock woman? That's supposed to scare us? It's supposed to warn you. There's 2 of us, both armed, and we're not interested in sharing. Ride on. Not how this works, friend. See, we came a long way, and we're not leaving empty-handed. The scarred man gestured, and the other 4 riders began to fan out, surrounding the house. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to come out nice and peaceful and show us where you keep your valuables. Do that. Maybe you live through the night. Mara, Ethan said quietly, not taking his eyes off the riders. You take the ones on the left. I'll take the right. Ethan, there's 5 of them. I know, but we don't have a choice. They're not leaving without a fight. He saw her nod in his peripheral vision, saw her move to the opposite window with the shotgun. The scarred man called out one more time. This is your last chance. Come out now, or we come in. Ethan's response was to raise the Winchester and fire a shot into the ground 5 feet in front of the man's horse. The animal reared, nearly throwing its rider. That's your warning shot. Next one won't miss. For a heartbeat, everything was still. Then chaos erupted. The riders drew weapons and opened fire. Windows shattered, wood splintered. Ethan and Mara dropped low, returning fire through the broken glass. The sound was deafening in the confined space. Gunshots, shouting, the scream of frightened horses. Ethan fired twice more, saw one rider clutch his shoulder and fall from his horse. Beside him, Mara's shotgun roared and another man went down. But the others were closing in, and Ethan knew they couldn't hold them off forever. The back door! Mara shouted. They're trying to flank us.
Ethan spun, saw movement in the shadows. He fired blind, heard a curse, fired again. The movement stopped, but now they were taking fire from two directions, and ammunition was running low. "We need to move," he said. "Upstairs. Better vantage point." On three. 1. Gunfire ripped through the window beside Mara, and she stumbled back with a cry. Ethan's heart stopped. "Mara!" "I'm okay, just wood splinters. Go!" They ran for the stairs, firing back as they went. Reached the upper hallway just as the front door crashed open below. Ethan grabbed Mara's arm, pulled her into her bedroom, slammed the door, and shoved a dresser against it. "How many rounds you got left?" he asked, breathing hard. 4. You? 6. He moved to the window, looked out. 3 riders remained in the yard, dismounted now, taking cover behind the water trough and the corral fence. The scarred man was among them, and even from this distance, Ethan could see the fury on his face. "This ain't over," the man shouted. "You hear me? We'll be back, and next time we'll burn this place to the ground with you in it." Ethan raised the Winchester, sighted carefully, and fired. The bullet pinged off the water trough inches from the man's head. The outlaw ducked, cursed, then whistled sharply. The 3 remaining men ran for their horses, mounted, and rode off into the pre-dawn darkness, leaving 2 of their companions dead or dying in the yard. The silence that followed was profound and terrible. Ethan slowly lowered the rifle, his hands shaking with adrenaline. Beside him, Mara slid down the wall to sit on the floor, the shotgun loose in her grip. "Is it over?" she asked quietly. "For now." But he meant what he said. "They'll be back. Then we'll be ready." Ethan looked at her, this woman who'd just fought off armed outlaws without hesitation, who sat bleeding from a dozen minor cuts but refused to show fear. "You're something else, you know that? So are you." She met his eyes. "Thank you for not running. You could have left me to face them alone and saved yourself. You didn't. Told you before? I'm not running anymore." As dawn broke over the ranch, they surveyed the damage. The house was shot full of holes, windows shattered, furniture destroyed. In the yard lay 2 dead men, one from Ethan's rifle, one from Mara's shotgun. Neither of them felt good about taking lives, but neither regretted it either. It had been survival, pure and simple. "We need to get the sheriff," Mara said, staring at the bodies. "Report this. Make sure Rourke knows we're not easy prey." "Agreed. But first..." Ethan turned to her, really looking at her in the growing light. Her face was smudged with powder smoke, her hands still trembling slightly, her eyes haunted but unbroken. "You're hurt." "It's nothing, just let me see." She held out her hands. They were covered in small cuts from flying glass and wood, one deeper than the others. Ethan took her hands in his gently, examining the damage. The simple act of holding her hands felt significant somehow, more intimate than anything that had passed between them before. "We need to clean these," he said quietly. "I know. I will. Just give me a minute. I need to..." Her voice cracked slightly. "I need to process what just happened." "Take all the time you need. I'll deal with..." He gestured toward the yard. "No." She straightened, pulling her hands back. "We do it together, like everything else." They wrapped the bodies in old canvas and loaded them onto the wagon. Neither spoke much during the grim task. Then they hitched up Dancer, secured the house as best they could, and made the journey back to Dry Hollow with their cargo. Sheriff Dalton's face went white when he saw what they'd brought. Sweet mercy, what happened? They told him everything while he examined the bodies and took notes. When they finished, he sat heavily in his desk chair, suddenly looking every one of his 50-some years. "This is bad," he said finally. "Really bad. You killed 2 of Rourke's men. He won't let that stand." "So what do we do?" Mara asked. "I'll send word to the territorial marshal, but that could take weeks. In the meantime..." He looked at them both. "You need help, more than just the 2 of you. I'll see if I can round up some men willing to ride out to your place, at least until Rourke moves on." "No one in this town is going to risk their lives for us," Mara said bitterly. "You know that as well as I do." "Maybe not for you," the sheriff admitted. "But I know a few men who owe Ethan here their lives from past run-ins, and I know a few more who hate Rourke enough to take a stand. Give me a day. I'll see what I can do. So they spent that day in town, buying more ammunition, replacing broken windows, speaking in low tones about fortifications and defensive positions. Ethan caught himself thinking like a soldier preparing for a siege, and the realization chilled him. This was supposed to be a new life, a fresh start. Instead, it was turning into a war. As evening approached, Sheriff Dalton found them at the general store. Got 4 men willing to ride out with you. They'll stay a week, help you shore up defenses, keep watch. After that, he shrugged. We'll see. Who are they? Ethan asked. Tom Brennan, Matthew Cross, and the Wu brothers. James and David. All of them good men, steady in a fight. They'll meet you at your place at sundown. True to his word, 4 riders arrived at the ranch just as the sun touched the horizon. Tom Brennan was a grizzled former cavalry scout with a face like weathered leather. Matthew Cross was younger, maybe 25, with the build of a blacksmith and eyes that missed nothing. James and David Wu were brothers in their 30s, quiet and efficient, who ran a small horse ranch west of town. Appreciate you coming, Ethan said as they dismounted. Rourke's been a plague on this territory too long, Tom said bluntly. About time someone stood up to him. Besides, the sheriff said you took down 2 of his men. That takes guts. He looked at Mara. Both of you. They spent the next 3 days transforming the ranch into something resembling a fortress. They reinforced doors and windows, created firing positions in the barn and house, established sight lines and kill zones. The Wu brothers, who had experience with defensive fortifications from their time working on the railroad, designed a system of barricades that could be quickly erected if needed. Through it all, Ethan and Mara worked alongside the men, earning their respect not through words, but through sweat and effort. Mara, in particular, surprised the newcomers with her competence and courage. She wasn't some helpless woman needing protection. She was a partner in defense of her home. On the 4th night, Tom Brennan pulled Ethan aside. Can I give you some advice? Go ahead. That woman of yours, she's tougher than most men I know, but she's still human, still scared, even if she won't show it. Make sure she knows she doesn't have to carry this alone. That's what having a partner means. Ethan nodded slowly. I'm learning that. Good, because I've seen how you 2 work together, seen how you watch out for each other. That's rare. Don't waste it. That evening, after the others had settled in for the night in the barn, Ethan found Mara sitting on the porch steps, staring out at the dark landscape. He sat beside her without speaking, just sharing the space. Do you think he'll come back? She asked finally. Rourke? Yeah, I do. Men like him don't forget when someone fights back. I keep seeing their faces, the men we killed. I keep wondering if they had families, people who'll miss them. They made a choice when they rode onto your property with guns drawn. You made a choice to survive. Don't torture yourself with guilt over that. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, how do you do it? Stay so calm, so sure of yourself? I'm not calm. I'm terrified. But being terrified and being paralyzed aren't the same thing. You keep moving, keep fighting, because the alternative is giving up, and I don't think either of us knows how to do that. Mara turned to look at him, and in the moonlight, her face was soft and vulnerable in a way he'd never seen. I'm glad you're here, Ethan. I know that's probably stupid to say, given how this all started, but it's true. I don't think I could face this alone. You're not alone, he said simply. Not anymore. She reached out tentatively and took his hand. It was the first time she'd initiated contact between them, and the gesture felt momentous. Her hand was calloused and strong, marked by years of hard work, and it fit perfectly in his. They sat like that for a long time, hands joined, watching the darkness, drawing strength from each other's presence. And somewhere in that shared silence, something shifted again, deeper this time, more fundamental. The bond between them, forged in forced proximity and tempered by violence, was transforming into something that felt dangerously close to real. Neither of them named it. Neither dared. But both felt it, like a spark-catching flame, fragile and fierce and impossible to ignore. Inside the house, the clock struck midnight. Outside, the land lay quiet and waiting. And on the porch, 2 people who'd been strangers a month ago sat together in the darkness, preparing for a war neither had chosen, but both would fight, not just for survival, but for something far more precious. for each other, for home, for the chance at a life that maybe, just maybe, was worth all the pain it took to claim it. The week that followed passed in strange duality, half fortress preparation, half something that felt almost like normalcy. Tom, Matthew, and the Wu brothers maintained their watch rotation, but during daylight hours the ranch buzzed with activity that transcended mere survival. Fences were mended not just for defense, but for function. The barn roof was finally completed. Mara's small vegetable garden, neglected during the chaos, was weeded and watered. Life, stubborn and determined, continued alongside the preparation for violence. Ethan found himself watching Mara in stolen moments, the way she moved through the property with quiet authority, checking on each task, offering suggestions, never demanding but always heard. She'd earned the respect of these hardened men not through force but through competence, and something about that stirred pride in him that he didn't fully understand. On the sixth day, as they worked together replacing a section of corral fence, Matthew Cross paused in his hammering to observe them with a knowing smile. "What?" Mara asked, catching his expression. "Nothing. Just thinking you two work well together, natural-like. Not many couples got that kind of rhythm." Mara flushed slightly, suddenly very focused on the post she was holding steady. "We've had practice. Practice helps, but it's more than that. My folks, they've been married 30 years and still can't work together without arguing. You two barely talk, and you know exactly what the other needs." Matthew shrugged. "Just saying, it's something worth noting." After he moved on to the next section, Ethan glanced at Mara. "He's not wrong." "About what?" "About us working well together. I hadn't really thought about it until he said it, but..." He drove a nail home with 2 solid strikes. "We do." "Does that surprise you?" "Everything about this surprises me," Ethan admitted. "A month ago, I would have said I wasn't built for partnership, too used to being alone, making decisions on my own. But working with you, it's different, easier somehow." Mara was quiet for a moment, holding the next post in position while he secured it. "My father used to say the best partnerships are the ones where both people are strong on their own, but stronger together. I never really understood what he meant until..." She trailed off, but the implication hung in the air between them. "Until now," Ethan finished quietly. "Until now," she agreed. That evening, Tom Brennan called a meeting in the barn. The 7 of them, 4 hired guns, 2 ranch owners who'd become fighters, and an uncertain future, gathered around a makeshift table constructed from sawhorses and planks. "All right," Tom began, his weathered face serious in the lantern light. "We need to talk about what happens when we leave." "When you leave," Mara's voice carried an edge of alarm. "I thought, we signed on for a week, and a week is what you're getting. Day after tomorrow, we head back to town. Got our own responsibilities, our own families to protect." Tom's expression softened. "But that don't mean we're leaving you defenseless. We've taught you what we can about fortifications and defensive positions. Now we need to talk strategy." David Wu leaned forward. "Rourke hasn't hit you again because he knows you've got reinforcements. Once we're gone, he'll come back. Question is when and how." "My guess is he'll wait another week or 2, James Wu added. "Let you get comfortable, let your guard down. Then he'll hit you at night, probably with his full gang, 8 to 10 men, heavily armed." "We can't fight those odds," Mara said flatly. "Even if Ethan and I are both crack shots, we'd be overwhelmed." "Which is why you don't fight them head on," Tom said. "You make them think twice about even trying. You turn this place into something that looks too dangerous, too costly, to be worth the trouble." Matthew Cross pulled out a crude map he'd sketched of the property. "We've been working on this. See here. If you set up warning bells at these 3 points along your property line, you'll hear anyone approaching from at least half a mile out. Gives you time to prepare. Then you've got your firing positions in the house and barn with clear sight lines. But the key is making them visible." "You want them to see our defenses?" Ethan asked, puzzled. Exactly. Outlaws like Rourke. They're predators. They look for easy targets. You make this place look hard. Lookout posts, visible barricades, signs that you're ready and waiting. There's a chance he decides it's not worth the trouble and moves on." "And if he doesn't?" Mara pressed. The men exchanged glances. Finally, Tom spoke. "Then you fight like hell. and you pray the sheriff gets here in time. I won't lie to you, Mara. The odds aren't good. But they're better than they were a week ago, and sometimes that's all you get. After the meeting, Ethan found himself unable to sleep. He left the barn loft and walked the property in the darkness, checking the warning bells they'd strung, examining the fortifications by moonlight. He was so lost in thought that he didn't hear Mara approach until she spoke. Can't sleep either? He turned to find her wrapped in a shawl, her hair loose for once, falling past her shoulders in dark waves. Without the constant tension that usually defined her, she looked younger, softer, and something in his chest tightened. "Lot on my mind," he said. "Me too." She came to stand beside him, looking out over the land. "I keep thinking about what Tom said, about the odds not being good. We've faced bad odds before. Not like this. Last time we had surprise and desperation on our side. Next time they'll be ready for us. They'll know we can fight. And there's only 2 of us, Ethan. 2 against 10. He heard the fear in her voice, carefully controlled but present. "You want to leave? Go to town? Stay there until this blows over?" "Leave?" She looked at him sharply. "This is my home, my father's legacy. His father's before that. You think I'm going to abandon it because some outlaw thinks he can scare me off?" I had to ask. "Well, now you know. I'm not leaving. Neither are you, apparently, which brings me to my next question." She turned to face him fully. "Why are you really staying, Ethan? You could ride out tomorrow, head for California or Mexico or anywhere that isn't here. Your obligation to the town ended the moment Rourke showed up. So why stay?" It was the question he'd been asking himself for days, maybe weeks. The answer, when it came, was simpler than he'd expected. "Because I want to," he said quietly. "Because somewhere between that forced marriage and fighting off armed outlaws, this stopped being a sentence and started being a choice. I'm staying because I choose to stay. Because you—" He stopped, uncertain how to finish. "Because I what?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "Because you matter," he said finally. "This place matters. The life we're building here, however strange it started, it matters. And I'm not walking away from that. Not unless you tell me to." Mara stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable in the shadows. Then, slowly, deliberately, she reached up and touched his face, just her fingertips against his jaw, the gentlest of contacts. "I don't want you to go," she said. "I know I should. I know it would be safer for you, smarter for both of us, but I don't want you to go." Ethan covered her hand with his, holding it against his face. The moment stretched between them, charged with everything they hadn't said, everything they were still too afraid to name. Then Mara stepped back, breaking the contact, her hand falling to her side. "We should get some sleep," she said, her voice slightly unsteady. "Tomorrow's going to be another long day. Mara—" "Good night, Ethan." She was already walking away, the shawl clutched tight around her shoulders. He watched her go, feeling like something significant had just happened, but unsure exactly what. The air still seemed to hum with the ghost of her touch, and his jaw felt cold where her fingers had been. The next 2 days passed in a flurry of final preparations. Tom and the others helped erect visible watch posts and taught Mara and Ethan a series of signal codes using lanterns that could summon help from town if needed. They drilled defensive positions until both Ethan and Mara could move through them blindfolded. They stockpiled ammunition, water, and food in strategic locations. On the final evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and red, the 4 hired guns prepared to leave. Tom shook Ethan's hand firmly. "You're a good man, Cole. Better than you probably give yourself credit for. Take care of her." "I will. And take care of yourself, too. Dead heroes don't do anyone any good." Matthew hugged Mara, a gesture that clearly surprised her, and whispered something Ethan couldn't hear. Whatever it was made her smile, rare and genuine. The Wu brothers offered formal nods and words of encouragement, then all 4 mounted up and rode toward town, leaving Ethan and Mara alone on their fortified ranch. The silence after they left felt profound. Mara stood in the yard, watching the dust settle from their departure, her arms wrapped around herself despite the warmth of the evening. "We're really doing this," she said, not a question but a statement of fact. "We are. Just you and me against whatever comes." "Just you and me," Ethan confirmed. He moved to stand beside her. "But we're not the same people we were a month ago. We're stronger now, smarter, and we've got something worth fighting for." She looked at him then, and there was something raw and vulnerable in her eyes. "What if it's not enough? What if we fight and we lose and everything we've built just ends? Then at least we fought. At least we didn't go down without making them pay for every inch." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "But I don't think we're going to lose, Mara. I think we're going to surprise everyone, including ourselves. That your optimism talking? That's my instinct talking. And my instinct says we're a hell of a lot more dangerous than anyone gives us credit for." A small smile tugged at her lips. "I hope your instinct is right. So do I." They established their new routine that night. Watches every 4 hours, weapons always within reach, sleeping in shifts. It was exhausting and unsustainable long term, but they both knew it wouldn't be long term. One way or another, this would come to a head soon. 3 days passed without incident, then 4, then 5. The tension was excruciating, like waiting for a storm that you could feel in your bones but couldn't yet see. Mara grew quieter, more withdrawn, the strain showing in the dark circles under her eyes and the tightness of her jaw. Ethan wasn't much better, jumping at every sound, seeing threats in every shadow. On the 6th night, as Mara prepared to take her watch, Ethan stopped her with a hand on her arm. "Talk to me," he said. "You've barely said 10 words today." "There's nothing to say." "There's plenty to say, you're just not saying it. Whatever you're carrying, let me help carry it." She pulled away, moving to the window, her back to him. When she spoke, her voice was tight with suppressed emotion. "I'm scared, Ethan. Terrified, actually. And I hate it. I hate feeling helpless, hate waiting for them to come. Hate that my father's legacy might end because I'm not strong enough to protect it." "You are strong enough. You're the strongest person I know." "Am I? Because right now I feel like I'm barely holding it together. I keep thinking about that night, about how close we came to dying, about how next time we might not be so lucky." She turned to face him, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "And the worst part is, I'm not even sure what I'm most afraid of losing anymore. The ranch or—" She stopped, pressing her lips together. "Or what?" Ethan asked gently. "Or you," she whispered. "Somewhere along the way, this stopped being about the ranch and started being about us. And that terrifies me more than anything else, because I don't know how to protect that. I don't know how to keep you safe." Ethan crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms. She stiffened for a heartbeat, then melted against him, her face pressed against his chest, her hands clutching his shirt. He held her tight, feeling her shake with silent sobs, and something in his heart cracked open. "Listen to me," he said quietly, his lips against her hair. "You don't have to keep me safe. That's not your job. We keep each other safe. We fight together, we stand together, and whatever happens, we face it together. You understand?" She nodded against his chest. "And you're not going to lose me. I'm not going anywhere. I told you before, I'm done running. This is where I belong, right here with you, fighting for this life we're building. So stop trying to carry everything alone. Let me be your partner, Mara. Really, your partner, not just in name or obligation, but in truth." She pulled back just enough to look up at him, her face wet with tears. "I don't know how to do that. I've been alone so long, I don't know how to let someone in. Then we'll learn together, because I'm not exactly an expert either." He reached up and gently wiped the tears from her cheeks. "But I'm willing to try if you are." For a long moment, she just looked at him. Then slowly, she rose on her toes and kissed him, soft and tentative and scared, but real. Ethan froze in surprise for a heartbeat, then kissed her back, one hand cupping her face, the other at the small of her back, holding her close. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Mara rested her forehead against his. "This is crazy," she whispered. "Yeah. We're in the middle of a war, waiting for killers to attack, and I'm kissing you." "Terrible timing," Ethan agreed. "The absolute worst." "Should we stop?" She pulled back to look at him, and despite the tear tracks on her face, there was a hint of smile on her lips. "Probably, but I don't want to." "Good. Neither do I." They stood like that for another long moment, foreheads touching, breathing the same air, both terrified and exhilarated by what had just happened between them. Then Mara sighed and stepped back. I should take my watch. Mara. We'll talk about this, she promised. After. When we're not waiting for outlaws to kill us. But right now, I need to focus. We both do. She was right, and Ethan knew it, but it didn't make it any easier to let her go. He watched as she picked up the rifle, checked the load, and took her position by the window. The moment of vulnerability had passed, and the warrior was back. But something fundamental had shifted between them, and there was no going back to what they'd been before. Ethan tried to sleep during her watch, but found it impossible. His mind kept replaying the kiss, the feel of her in his arms, the way she'd looked at him with something that might have been love, or might have been fear, or might have been both. He'd spent 32 years avoiding exactly this: connection, vulnerability, the terrifying possibility of caring about someone more than he cared about himself. And now, trapped in the middle of nowhere with danger closing in from all sides, he'd gone and fallen for a woman who'd been forced to marry him at gunpoint. The universe, he decided, had a twisted sense of humor. When his watch came around at 2 a.m, he found Mara curled in a chair, asleep despite her best efforts to stay awake. He didn't wake her, just draped a blanket over her shoulders and took up his position, listening to the sounds of the night. 3 hours into his watch, the warning bell on the north side of the property rang. Ethan was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand, moving to wake Mara. We've got company, north side. She was awake and armed in seconds. How many? Can't tell yet. Could be animals, could be... The west bell rang. Then the south. Not animals, Mara said grimly. They're surrounding us. Ethan moved from window to window, trying to see movement in the darkness. There, shadows separating from shadows, at least 8 riders, maybe more, spreading out to encircle the house. They'd learned from last time, coming in force, coming with a plan. Positions, he said quietly. Just like we practiced. They'd prepared for this scenario, Mara upstairs with the Winchester covering the northern and eastern approaches. Ethan downstairs with his revolver and the shotgun, watching south and west. 2 people, 8 windows, a house that suddenly felt far too big and far too vulnerable. The riders stopped about 100 yards out, just beyond effective rifle range. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then a voice called out, cold and mocking and all too familiar. Ethan Cole! Mara Whitlock! I think it's time we had ourselves a conversation. Caleb Rourke, the scarred man from the first attack. Ethan moved to the broken front window, staying low. We've got nothing to say to you, Rourke. Oh, I think you do. See, you killed 2 of my men. That's a debt that needs settling. But I'm a reasonable man, so I'm going to give you a choice. A pause, deliberate and theatrical. Send the woman out, and I'll let you live. You can ride out of here, head for any horizon you like, and I'll consider the debt paid. Beside him, Ethan heard Mara's sharp intake of breath from upstairs. Not happening, Ethan shouted back. Think about it, Cole. You barely know this woman. Why die for a stranger in a marriage you never wanted? Take the smart play. Save yourself. I said no. Your funeral. Rourke's voice hardened. Last chance. Send her out in the next 60 seconds, or we burn that house down with both of you in it. Ethan looked up toward the stairs, where he knew Mara was listening. For a heartbeat, their eyes met across the distance, and he saw fear there, yes, but also determination. Also trust. Also something that looked dangerously like love. Together, she called down softly. Together, he confirmed. He turned back to the window and shouted, Here's my answer, Rourke. He fired through the window, not aiming to hit, but to send a message. The shot echoed across the property, defiant and clear. Rourke's laugh was ugly. Wrong choice, Cole. Boys, burn it down. What happened next was chaos given form. Flaming torches arced through the night, landing on the porch, against the barn, near the house. The outlaws opened fire, and suddenly the world was noise and violence and the acrid smell of smoke. Ethan returned fire, measured shots, making each bullet count. Above him, Mara's Winchester cracked steadily, and he heard a cry of pain from outside. She'd hit someone. But the fire was spreading. The porch was fully engulfed now, flames licking at the wooden walls of the house. Smoke began seeping in through the broken windows, and Ethan felt his throat constrict. Mara, we need to move. Where? They've got us surrounded. He looked around desperately. The house was a death trap now, but outside meant facing 9 or 10 armed men in the open. They were out of options, out of time, out of luck. Then he saw it. The root cellar. The entrance was in the kitchen, a heavy wooden door set into the floor. It opened into a stone-lined chamber that his father-in-law had built for storing vegetables through the winter. Stone wouldn't burn, and it had a second exit that opened into the barn. "The cellar!" he shouted. "Get down here now!" Mara came thundering down the stairs, coughing in the thickening smoke. Ethan grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the kitchen. Behind them, the front wall of the house erupted in flames. The heat was intense, the smoke blinding. Ethan felt his way to the cellar door, yanked it open, and practically threw Mara down the ladder. He followed, pulling the door shut behind them just as part of the ceiling collapsed. They tumbled into darkness, landing hard on the packed earth floor. For a moment they just lay there, gasping for breath, listening to the muffled roar of the fire above them. "You okay?" Ethan managed. "Yeah, you?" "Been better." He felt around in the darkness until he found the lantern they'd stored down here as part of their preparations. His hands shook as he lit it, and warm light filled the small chamber. Mara's face was streaked with soot, her eyes wide but focused. "They're going to think we're dead," she said. "Good. Let them think that. Gives us an advantage." "What advantage?" "We're trapped in a hole while they burn down my home." "Not trapped. There's a tunnel. Your father must have built it as an escape route. Leads to the barn. We wait until they think we're dead, then we come up behind them." "That's insane. There's still 9 or 10 of them. 9 or 10 who think they've won, who've let their guard down, who won't be expecting us." Ethan checked his revolver. 4 rounds left. The shotgun had 2. Not much, but it would have to be enough. "We've got surprise, we've got fury, and we've got nothing left to lose. That makes us the most dangerous people on this property." Mara stared at him for a long moment. Then a fierce grin spread across her face. "You're absolutely crazy." "Yeah, but so are you. That's why this might actually work." They waited in the cellar for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. Above them they heard boots on the floorboards, Rourke's men searching the ruins. Heard voices arguing about whether the bodies were too burned to identify. Heard, eventually, the sounds of celebration, bottles being opened, the outlaws congratulating themselves on a job well done. "Now," Ethan whispered, while they're distracted. They moved through the tunnel, a crude passage barely tall enough to crouch through, emerging in the back corner of the barn. The building had survived the fire, though smoke damage was evident. Through the gaps in the walls, they could see the outlaws gathered in the yard, drinking, laughing, dividing up what little loot they'd found. Caleb Rourke stood apart from them, staring at the burning house with an expression of grim satisfaction. 9 men, Ethan counted. They'd lost 1 more to Mara's shooting, which made the odds slightly better. Still terrible, but better. "On my signal," he whispered to Mara. "You take the ones on the left, I'll take the right. Aim for center mass, don't stop until they're down. And Mara?" "Yeah?" "I love you. Felt like you should know that, in case this goes bad." She looked at him, eyes shining in the dim light. "I love you too. Now let's go make them pay for burning down my house." They exploded out of the barn like avenging spirits, weapons raised, firing before the outlaws even registered their presence. 2 men went down in the first volley. Ethan's 3rd shot took down a 4th. Mara's Winchester cracked 3 times in rapid succession, and 3 more outlaws fell. But the survivors were scattering now, diving for cover, returning fire. Bullets whined past Ethan's head. He heard Mara cry out and his heart stopped, but she kept firing, so she was alive. Hurt maybe, but alive. He emptied his revolver, dropped it, brought up the shotgun. A man rose from behind the water trough. Ethan pulled both triggers and the man went down. The shotgun was empty now. He dove for cover behind the corral fence, grabbed a fallen outlaw's rifle, and kept shooting. The fight lasted maybe 90 seconds, maybe an hour. Time lost all meaning in the chaos of violence. When the gunfire finally stopped, 8 outlaws lay dead or dying in the yard. Only Caleb Rourke remained standing, and he was stumbling toward his horse, blood pouring from a wound in his side. Ethan rose from cover, rifle raised. "Rourke!" The outlaw turned, his face twisted with pain and rage. His gun came up. A single shot rang out. Rourke jerked, looked down at the new hole in his chest, then collapsed face first in the dirt. Ethan turned to see Mara standing 20 feet away, her rifle still raised, her face hard as stone. "That's for my father's house," she said quietly. Then she lowered the weapon and her legs gave out. Ethan reached her in 3 strides, catching her before she hit the ground. "Where are you hit?" "Left shoulder. I think it went through. I'm okay, She looked past him at the carnage in the yard, at the bodies of 9 dead men, at the smoldering ruins of her childhood home. "We won. We actually won." "We did," Ethan said, examining her wound. She was right, through and through, probably missing anything vital. She'd live, though she'd carry the scar forever. "You were incredible. So were you." She looked up at him, and despite the pain, despite the devastation surrounding them, she smiled. "We make a pretty good team, Cole." "The best," he agreed. Then, because they were alive and the danger was past, and nothing else mattered, he kissed her, not gentle like before, but fierce and desperate, tasting of smoke and blood and victory. When they broke apart, dawn was breaking over the ranch, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The house was gone, reduced to smoking ruins. The barn stood damaged but intact. Bodies littered the yard. It looked like the aftermath of a war, which Ethan supposed it was, but they were alive. They were together. And the land itself, the earth and the sky, the water and the grass, remained untouched, waiting to be worked again, to be lived on again, to be loved again. Mara leaned against him, and he wrapped his arm around her, careful of her wounded shoulder. They stood like that as the sun rose, 2 survivors contemplating the wreckage and the future in equal measure. "What now?" Mara asked softly. "Now? Now we rebuild. Together." Ethan looked down at her. "If that's what you want." "That's what I want," she said, "more than anything." They would need to ride to town soon, get help, report what had happened, get Mara's shoulder properly treated. The sheriff would have questions, the town would have opinions, there would be funerals for the outlaws, cleanup of the property, weeks or months of hard work ahead. But all of that could wait. For now, in this moment of hard-won peace, they simply held each other and watched the sunrise paint their world in new light. The ranch that had been a prison had become a home. The marriage that had been forced had become chosen. The strangers had become partners, then allies, then something far deeper and far more precious. They had fought for their life together, and they had won. Now came the harder part, building that life into something that could last, something that could grow, something that could transform 2 broken people into something whole. But if the past month had taught them anything, it was that they were stronger together than they'd ever been apart. And that strength, forged in fire and tempered in blood, was enough to face whatever came next. The sun continued its rise, indifferent to human struggles and triumphs. But on that scarred piece of land, 2 people stood together and claimed their victory, their love, and their future. And for the first time in either of their lives, the future looked bright. They stayed like that for several minutes more, watching the light strengthen, neither willing to break the fragile piece of survival. But reality had a way of demanding attention, and Mara's shoulder was bleeding steadily through the makeshift bandage Ethan had pressed against it. "We need to get you to town," he said finally. "That wound needs proper cleaning and stitching." "I know." She didn't move. "But the second we leave, this becomes real. The law gets involved, people ask questions, the whole mess becomes official. Right now, it's just ours, our fight, our victory. Once we tell the sheriff, it belongs to everyone." Ethan understood. He felt the same reluctance to share what had happened, to have their private war dissected and judged by people who hadn't been there, hadn't felt the fear or the fury or the desperate will to survive. But her blood was soaking through his fingers, and pragmatism won over sentiment. "Can you ride?" he asked. "I can do whatever needs doing. You should know that by now." He helped her to the barn where Dancer waited, miraculously unharmed despite the chaos. The horse nickered softly, pressing her nose against Mara's good hand as if offering comfort. Ethan saddled her quickly, then helped Mara mount, swinging up behind her so he could support her during the ride. She leaned back against his chest with a soft sigh, and he wrapped one arm around her waist, holding her steady. The ride to Dry Hollow took twice as long as normal, with Mara's injury and exhaustion slowing them. The sun climbed higher, turning the morning cool into midday heat. Mara drifted in and out of consciousness, her weight heavy against Ethan's chest, and he found himself talking to her in a low murmur. Nonsense words, really. Just the sound of his voice keeping her anchored to wakefulness. "Stay with me, Mara. We're almost there. You're going to be fine. Just a little further. That's it. Keep breathing. I've got you." When they finally reached the edge of town, several people stopped to stare. Ethan knew what they saw. Two people covered in soot and blood, one barely conscious, riding a single horse at a walk. He ignored the stares and headed straight for the sheriff's office. Sheriff Dalton was at his desk when they arrived. He took one look at them through the window and was out the door before Ethan could dismount. "What in the hell happened?" Dalton demanded, reaching up to help ease Mara down. She groaned as the movement jarred her shoulder. "Rourke came back," Ethan said flatly. "Last night. 10 men, torches, the whole arsenal. They burned the house. And both of you are—" The sheriff seemed unable to complete the thought. "We're alive. They're not. All 10 of them, dead on the property, Rourke included." Dalton stared at him. "You're telling me the two of you killed 10 armed outlaws?" "We're telling you we survived," Mara said, her voice weak but clear. "They wanted us dead. We disagreed. Henry, I need Doc Morrison. This shoulder's not going to fix itself." The sheriff snapped into action, calling for the doctor, helping them inside, firing off questions that Ethan answered in clipped sentences while Mara sat pale and swaying in a chair. Within minutes, Doc Morrison arrived. Samuel Morrison's brother, a thin man with steady hands and kind eyes who'd seen more gunshot wounds than anyone should. "Let's have a look," he said, carefully cutting away Mara's shirt to expose the wound. She hissed in pain but didn't cry out. "Through and through, like you said. You're lucky. Missed the bone, missed the major vessels. You're going to hurt like hell for a few weeks, but you'll heal." He looked at Ethan. "You hurt? Nothing that matters. I'll be the judge of that. Sit down. Let me check you over." While Doc Morrison worked cleaning and stitching Mara's wound and then examining Ethan for injuries he'd barely noticed in the heat of battle, burns on his hands, a gash on his temple, bruised ribs, Sheriff Dalton organized a group to ride out to the ranch. By the time both of them were bandaged and Mara's arm was in a sling, the full story had spread through town like wildfire. The Longshot Saloon, despite the early hour, was packed when they emerged from the doctor's office. People lined the street, whispering, pointing, staring with a mixture of awe and something that looked like fear. Ethan felt Mara tense beside him. "They're looking at us like we're dangerous," she murmured. "We are dangerous," Ethan replied. "We just killed 10 men. That's not something people forget." "I don't want to be feared. I just want to be left alone." "I know, but that's not how this works. Not anymore." Silas Thorne emerged from the crowd, his weathered face unreadable. The old man who'd orchestrated their forced marriage studied them both with those cold, calculating eyes. "Heard you had visitors last night," he said. "We did," Mara replied, her tone carefully neutral. "Heard you sent them to their maker, all of them. That true?" "It's true." Silas was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Never thought you had it in you, Mara. Always figured you were your father's daughter, but this is something else entirely." He looked at Ethan. "And you? Thought we were giving you a death sentence, marrying you to a failing ranch in the middle of nowhere. Turns out we gave you something worth fighting for." "You didn't give me anything," Ethan said coldly. "You forced a choice. What Mara and I built after that had nothing to do with you." "Maybe so, but the result's the same. Two people standing where most would have fallen. Town owes you thanks, whether you want it or not. Rourke's been a plague on this territory for years. You ended that." "We didn't do it for the town," Mara said. "We did it to survive. Motivation don't matter. Dead is dead, and Rourke's gang is finished." Silas glanced around at the gathered crowd. "You've earned respect today. Real respect. Use it wisely." He walked away, leaving them standing in the street with dozens of eyes still watching. Tom Brennan pushed through the crowd, Matthew Cross and the Wu brothers right behind him. "Heard what happened," Tom said gruffly. "Wish we'd been there." "We managed," Ethan said. More than managed. You won a war. Tom shook his hand firmly. You need anything. Rebuilding, supplies, extra hands. You ask. We'll be there. Appreciate it. The crowd began to disperse slowly, conversations buzzing with speculation and embellishment. By nightfall, Ethan knew the story would have grown. They'd have fought 20 men or 30 or an entire army. That was how legends were born, not from truth, but from the stories people told afterward. Can we go now? Mara asked quietly. I'm exhausted and this shoulder hurts like hell and I just want to... Want to what? I don't know. Sleep for a week. Cry. Burn something. All of the above. She looked at him with hollow eyes. Is it wrong that I don't feel victorious? We won, but I just feel empty. You're not wrong. Killing takes something from you, even when it's necessary, even when it's them or you. Ethan took her good hand. Let's get you somewhere you can rest. We'll figure out the rest later. Sheriff Dalton offered them rooms at the boarding house on the edge of town. Simple accommodations, but clean and quiet. Mara fell asleep almost the moment her head touched the pillow, her body finally surrendering to exhaustion and blood loss. Ethan sat in a chair by the window, watching her sleep, processing everything that had happened in the last 12 hours. They'd won. Against impossible odds, they'd survived and won. But the cost was written in the ashes of Mara's childhood home, in the bodies of 10 men lying dead on the property, in the bullet hole through Mara's shoulder that would scar and ache for the rest of her life. Victory, Ethan realized, was a complicated thing. Less triumph, more survival. Less glory, more grief. He must have dozed off eventually, because he woke to find afternoon light slanting through the window and Mara sitting up in bed, watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. How long was I out? She asked. Few hours. How do you feel? Like I got shot, fought a war, and burned down my house, so pretty terrible. She shifted, wincing. But alive. That counts for something. It counts for everything. She was quiet for a moment, picking at the blanket with her good hand. Ethan, what Silas said earlier about respect and using it wisely, what did he mean? He meant people see us differently now. See you differently. You're not just the struggling ranch woman anymore. You're the woman who stood against Caleb Rourke and won. That carries weight in a place like Dry Hollow. I don't want weight. I just want to rebuild my home and live my life in peace. I know. But sometimes we don't get to choose how people see us. We just get to choose what we do with it. Mara absorbed this, then changed the subject. What do we do now? About the ranch, I mean. The house is gone, the barn's damaged, we've got no shelter, limited supplies, and I can barely lift my arm. How do we rebuild from this? Same way we've done everything else. One day at a time, one task at a time, together. You keep saying that, together, like it's some kind of magic word that fixes everything. Isn't it? Ethan moved from the chair to sit on the edge of the bed. A month ago, neither of us could have survived what we just went through. But together, we're still here, we're still standing. That's not magic, Mara. That's partnership. That's what happens when two people decide they're worth more combined than they ever were separate. She reached out with her good hand and touched his face. The same gesture she'd made that night on the property, but this time there was no hesitation, no uncertainty. I meant what I said before the fight. I love you, Ethan Cole. I don't know how it happened or when exactly, but somewhere between the forced marriage and the gunfight, I fell completely in love with you. I love you too, he said, covering her hand with his. And I'm going to spend every day proving that you didn't make a mistake trusting me. I already know I didn't. You've proven that 100 times over. She smiled, tired but genuine. Now kiss me before I pass out again. This medicine Doc Morrison gave me is making me fuzzy. He kissed her gently, mindful of her injuries and exhaustion. When he pulled back, her eyes were already drooping closed again. Sleep, he murmured. I'll be right here. Promise? Promise. She drifted off with her hand still in his, and Ethan sat there in the quiet room, thinking about promises and futures and the strange, winding road that had brought them to this moment. He'd come to Dry Hollow as a drifter with no past and no future, and somehow he'd found both. Found a home in a woman who'd been forced to marry him. found purpose in protecting a piece of land that wasn't even his by birth, found love in the last place and the last way he'd ever expected. Over the next 3 days, while Mara rested and healed, Ethan dealt with the aftermath. Sheriff Dalton and his deputies confirmed the body count at the ranch, all 10 outlaws dead, including Caleb Rourke. The territorial marshal arrived to take statements and officially close the case. He was a hard-eyed man named Garrett who'd been hunting Rourke for 2 years, and his grudging respect was evident. "You did the territory a service," Garrett said, reviewing Ethan's written statement. "Rourke's gang was responsible for at least 15 murders, probably more. You ended that. The governor will want to thank you personally." "We don't need thanks," Ethan said. "We need to be left alone to rebuild." "Fair enough. But there's a reward. $500 for Rourke, another $200 for known gang members. That money's yours by law." Ethan stared at him. $700 was more money than he'd ever had at one time in his life. Enough to rebuild the house, restock the ranch, buy new equipment, and still have something left over. "You're serious?" "Dead serious, if you'll pardon the expression. The money will be delivered to Sheriff Dalton within the week. Use it however you see fit." Garrett stood, extending his hand. "And Cole, don't ever let anyone tell you that you didn't earn this. You and your wife did something most armed pauses couldn't manage. Be proud of that." After the marshal left, Ethan walked the town in a daze, the idea of $700 almost impossible to process. He found himself at the general store where Samuel Morrison greeted him with uncharacteristic warmth. "Ethan Cole, the man of the hour. What can I do for you?" "Need supplies, building materials, tools, everything for starting construction on a new house. Can you put together a list of what we'd need and what it would cost?" Morrison's eyes widened. "You're rebuilding already? Mara's barely out of bed." "She will be soon, and when she is, I want to have a plan ready. That ranch is her legacy. I'm not letting it die because of Rourke." That's admirable, son. Give me an hour, and I'll have your list." While Morrison compiled the supplies, Ethan stopped by the Long Shot Saloon. It was early afternoon, and the place was mostly empty except for a few regulars. He ordered a whiskey, his first drink since the night of the brawl that had started this whole mess, and sat at the bar considering how much his life had changed. "You're a celebrity now," the bartender observed, sliding him the glass. "Half the town thinks you're a hero. Other half thinks you're the devil himself. Either way, you're the most talked-about man in 50 miles. Not interested in being talked about? Then you're in the wrong business. Killing Caleb Rourke? That's the kind of thing that gets written up in newspapers, told in stories. You're going to be famous whether you like it or not." Ethan downed the whiskey in one burn and pushed the glass back. "I just want to rebuild my home and live in peace with my wife. That too much to ask?" "In this world? Sometimes. But I hope you get it anyway. You've earned it." By the time Ethan returned to the boarding house, Mara was awake and attempting to dress herself one-handed with limited success. He helped her finish, then relayed the news about the reward money. Her reaction was pure disbelief. $700? That's more than my father made in 3 good years. Are you certain? Marshall's word, money comes next week. Then we can rebuild. Not just patch and repair, but really rebuild. Do it right this time. Her eyes brightened with something that looked like hope. We could expand the barn, add a proper root cellar, maybe even put in that windmill Father always talked about. We could make the ranch not just survive, but thrive. That's exactly what we're going to do. I've already got Morrison pricing out materials. Soon as you're strong enough to ride, we'll head back and start clearing the damage. Few months of hard work, and you'll have a home again. Better than before. We'll have a home, Mara corrected. Not just me. We. This is your ranch too now, Ethan. Your home. Your legacy to build. Don't forget that. He pulled her close, careful of her wounded shoulder, and held her. Our home. Our legacy. I like the sound of that. The next morning, Tom Brennan appeared at the boarding house with news. Got 20 men ready to help with the cleanup and rebuild. We figured between all of us, we could have the old house cleared and a new foundation poured in under a week. After that, we'll help with the frame and walls. You two provide materials, we provide labor. Sound fair? Ethan was stunned. Tom, we can't ask that of people. You're not asking, we're offering. You stood against Rourke when the rest of us would have run. Least we can do is help you rebuild. Besides, Tom added with a slight smile, Mara's got folks who remember her father. Good man, Jacob Whitlock. Helped half the ranchers in this territory at one time or another. This is us paying that forward. Mara, who'd been listening from the doorway, stepped forward. Tom Brennan, if you make me cry right now, I swear I'll shoot you with my good arm. He laughed. Wouldn't dream of it. But I mean what I said. You've got help, whether you want it or not. Can't rebuild alone. Seems we're learning that, Ethan said. About a lot of things. 4 days after the battle, Mara was strong enough to ride back to the ranch. Ethan helped her mount Dancer, and they made the journey together in the soft morning light. Neither spoke much, both preparing themselves for what they'd find. The reality was somehow both better and worse than expected. The house was indeed gone, nothing but a black scar, and the stone chimney still standing like a grave marker. The barn had survived, but bore the marks of fire and violence. The yard was cleaned of bodies, but the ground was torn and scarred from the battle. Bullet holes riddled the remaining structures. Scorch marks blackened the earth. Mara dismounted slowly and walked to where the house had stood. She picked up something from the ashes, a piece of her mother's china, somehow unbroken, white porcelain with blue flowers. She held it like it was made of light. This was from her wedding set, she said softly. Father gave it to her when they married. She used to say it was the finest thing she'd ever owned. She looked at the ruins. 40 years of memories gone in one night. Memories aren't in the house, Ethan said gently. They're in you, in the stories you carry, the lessons your father taught, the life your mother built here. Rourke burned wood and stone. He couldn't touch what really mattered. When did you become a philosopher? When I married a woman who taught me that home isn't a place, it's a choice you make every day, to stay, to build, to fight for what matters. He took her hand. We'll build a new house, Mara. New memories. But the foundation, the real foundation, that's us. And no fire can burn that down. She pressed the piece of china into his hand. Keep this. For our new home. Something old to anchor something new. Our home, he repeated, closing his fingers around the porcelain. I like that more every time you say it. True to Tom's word, the help began arriving the next day. 20 men with tools and wagons ready to work. They cleared the debris, salvaged what could be saved, and began the hard work of preparation. The Wu brothers took charge of the foundation, designing something stronger and more stable than what had been there before. Matthew Cross organized the lumber shipments. Tom coordinated the work crews. Mara, still limited by her wounded shoulder, served as foreman and planner, directing the work with quiet authority. Ethan watched her bloom in this role, no longer the isolated woman struggling alone, but a leader orchestrating a community effort. The men respected her, listened to her, took pride in doing the work right because she expected nothing less. You're good at this? Ethan told her one evening as they surveyed the progress. The foundation was poured, the frame was going up, and the new house was beginning to take shape, larger than before, stronger, built to last. Good at what? Leading, bringing people together, making them want to do their best. He slipped his arm around her waist. You're going to make this ranch into something special, Mara. I can see it happening already. We're going to make it special, she corrected for what felt like the 100th time. Stop trying to give me all the credit. This is ours, Ethan. Every board, every nail, every brick. Ours together. The work continued through late autumn, the new house rising from the ashes of the old. It was larger, more practical, built with lessons learned from years of ranch life. A wide porch for sitting in the evening, larger windows for light and air. A second floor with real bedrooms, plural, with a future in mind. A stone fireplace built from river rock, massive and beautiful. And through it all, Ethan and Mara worked side by side, their partnership deepening with every shared decision, every compromise, every moment of building something that belonged to both of them equally. The forced marriage that had started with resentment and resignation had transformed into something neither could have imagined. A partnership built on respect, tempered in fire, and sustained by love. On the day they moved into the completed house, the whole town came for the celebration. Tables were set up in the yard, food appeared from every household, and music played as the sun set over the property. Silas Thorne approached them as they stood on their new porch, surveying the gathering. "Never thought I'd see this place so full of life," the old man said. "Jacob Whitlock would be proud, Mara. And surprised, probably. He always said this land was cursed, fought him every step of the way. But you two—" He shook his head. "You made it something different, something better." "We made it ours," Mara said simply, leaning against Ethan's shoulder. "That's all we ever wanted." "Well, you got it. And more than that, you got a future here. A real one." Silas looked at Ethan. "Still think we gave you a death sentence?" Ethan looked down at Mara, saw her smile up at him, felt the solid weight of the house behind them and the good earth beneath their feet. "No," he said. "You gave me a life. Just took me a while to realize it." After the party ended and the guests departed, Ethan and Mara stood together on their porch in the darkness, watching the stars emerge one by one overhead. The land stretched out before them, familiar and strange at once. The same earth, but transformed by everything they'd survived and built. "What are you thinking about?" Mara asked quietly. "How different this is from where I thought I'd be. Month and a half ago, I was a drifter with nothing but a horse and a bad reputation. Now I've got a home, a wife I actually love, and a reason to wake up every morning. It's almost too much to process." "I know what you mean. I was resigned to dying alone on this ranch, forgotten by everyone. Now I've got a partner, a future, and a house full of possibilities." She squeezed his hand. "Thank you." "For what?" "For staying, for fighting, for choosing this life with me instead of the road. I know it probably wasn't what you wanted." "It's exactly what I wanted," Ethan interrupted. "I just didn't know it until I found it, or until it found me. Either way, I'm not going anywhere. This is home now. You're home now." She turned to face him, rising on her toes to kiss him softly. "Then welcome home, Ethan Cole. For real this time. Not forced, not obligated, just chosen." "Just chosen," he agreed, pulling her close. "Best choice I ever made." They went inside together as the moon rose over the ranch. Two people who'd started as strangers bound by law and circumstance, who'd become partners forged in violence and survival, and who'd finally transformed into something neither had dared hope for. Two people in love, building a life together, turning a forced bond into a chosen future. The house smelled of new wood and fresh paint. The windows glowed with lamplight, and inside Ethan and Mara began the next chapter of their story. Not with drama or violence, but with the quiet intimacy of two people learning to build a life together, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of love at a time. Outside, the land waited patiently for morning. The cattle had been restocked, the fences mended, the future secured. The ranch that had been dying was alive again, and the two people who'd saved it stood at the threshold of something new and fragile and infinitely precious. A real marriage, a real home, a real chance at happiness. And this time, no one could take it away from them. They'd fought too hard, survived too much, loved too deeply to let anyone or anything threaten what they'd built. The ranch was theirs. The future was theirs. And most importantly, they were each other's. Not by force, not by obligation, but by choice. The best choice either of them had ever made. The first winter on the rebuilt ranch came early that year, arriving in late November with snow that blanketed the property in white silence. Ethan woke before dawn on the first truly cold morning to find Mara already up, standing at the kitchen window with a cup of coffee cradled in both hands, watching the snow fall. "You're up early," he said, moving behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "Couldn't sleep. Keep thinking about last winter, how I spent it alone, wondering if I'd make it through, if the ranch would make it through." She leaned back against him. "Everything's different now." "Everything," he agreed, resting his chin on the top of her head. "We've got a full barn, healthy cattle, enough supplies to last through spring, and each other. Especially that." She turned in his arms to face him. "Ethan, there's something I need to tell you. Something I've been holding back because I wasn't sure how you'd react." His heart quickened. "What is it?" "I'm late. By about 3 weeks." She searched his face anxiously. "I think I might be pregnant." The words hung in the air between them, massive and transformative. Ethan felt a cascade of emotions: shock, joy, fear, wonder, all competing for dominance. A child. Their child. The ultimate proof that what they'd built was real and permanent and extending into a future neither had dared imagine. "You think or you know?" he asked carefully. "I'm fairly certain. All the signs are there. I wanted to wait to be sure before I said anything, and I wanted to see how you'd respond to the possibility." "How I'd respond?" Ethan pulled her closer, gentle but firm. "Mara, a child with you is about the best thing I could imagine. Terrifying, sure. I don't know the first thing about being a father. But with you, we'll figure it out, same way we've figured out everything else." Relief flooded her face. "You mean that? You're not just saying it?" "I mean it with everything I am. This ranch needs a future, needs someone to carry it forward. And more than that, I want a family with you. Want to build something that lasts beyond just us." He cupped her face in his hands. "We're going to have a baby." "But we're going to have a baby," she repeated. And then she was crying and laughing simultaneously, and Ethan was holding her while snow continued to fall outside their warm house, blanketing the world in new beginning. The confirmation came 2 weeks later when Doc Morrison made a house call. He examined Mara thoroughly, asked his questions, and finally nodded with satisfaction. "You're definitely pregnant. I'd say about 2 months along, which means the baby should arrive sometime in late May or early June. Right around the time the spring calving is finished, so at least you won't have both happening at once." He smiled at their nervous faces. "First baby?" "First everything," Ethan admitted. "Any advice?" "Take care of her. Make sure she eats well, gets rest, doesn't overdo it. The first 3 months are the most delicate, but after that, most women are fine to continue normal activities. Just use common sense and listen to your body," this last directed at Mara. "And try not to worry too much. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. You'll do fine." After he left, Mara sat on the couch with her hand on her still flat stomach, a look of wonder on her face. "There's a person growing inside me, a tiny human that's half you and half me. That's miraculous and terrifying in equal measure." "Leaning more toward one than the other?" Ethan asked, sitting beside her. "Both. Equally, constantly." She looked at him. "What if I'm not a good mother? What if I'm too hard, too closed off? My own mother died when I was 12. I barely remember what it was like to be mothered. How am I supposed to do that for someone else?" "The same way you've done everything else. By trying, by caring, by not giving up even when it's hard. You're the strongest person I know, Mara. You're going to be an amazing mother." "And you? You ready to be a father?" Ethan considered the question honestly. "No, not even close. The idea scares the hell out of me, but I'm going to do it anyway because that's what you do when something matters. You figure it out as you go." "We figure it out," she corrected with a small smile. "Together, remember?" "Together," he confirmed, taking her hand. "Always together." News of Mara's pregnancy spread through Dry Hollow within days, as all news did in small towns. The reaction was overwhelmingly positive. Gifts appeared on their porch, neighbors stopped by with advice and hand-me-down baby items, and women who'd previously kept Mara at arm's length suddenly embraced her as one of their own. She was no longer just the isolated ranch woman or the fighter who'd killed Caleb Rourke. She was going to be a mother, and that transformed her in the town's eyes into something both ordinary and sacred. "It's strange," Mara told Ethan one evening as they sorted through yet another basket of gifts. "I spent years being invisible to these people. Then we fought Rourke, and suddenly I was dangerous and frightening. Now I'm pregnant, and suddenly I'm acceptable? Normal? I can't quite figure out the logic." "People need categories," Ethan said. "Ways to understand each other. Fighter, mother, wife. These are roles they know how to relate to. You've just moved from one category to another in their minds." "But I'm still the same person." "No, you're not. None of us are the same as we were 6 months ago. You've changed, I've changed. Hell, even the town's changed. We're all different because of what happened. The pregnancy is just making it visible in a way people can understand and celebrate." Mara absorbed this, then held up a tiny knitted hat. "This is so small. How can a human be small enough to wear this?" "We'll find out in about 6 months. That's not comforting." "It wasn't meant to be. I'm just as terrified as you are." She laughed then, and the sound filled their home with warmth. Winter deepened and the ranch settled into the quiet rhythm of cold weather routine. The cattle were brought to the closer pastures where they could be easily checked. Hay was distributed daily. Ice was broken on water troughs each morning. The work was constant but manageable, especially with Ethan taking on the heavier tasks as Mara's pregnancy progressed. She chafed at the restrictions at first, insisting she could do everything she'd always done. But by her 4th month, when her body began to change visibly and fatigue set in unpredictably, she reluctantly accepted that growing a human required energy she didn't have for other things. "I hate this," she said one afternoon, watching Ethan repair a fence section she'd normally have tackled herself. "Hate feeling useless." "You're not useless. You're building a person. That's the most important work on this ranch right now." "Easy for you to say. You're not the one waddling around like an overstuffed duck." "You're not waddling yet. Give it another 2 months." She threw a balled-up piece of paper at him, which he dodged with a grin. These moments of levity were precious, breaking up the harder stretches when pregnancy made her sick or uncomfortable or overwhelmed. Tom Brennan and the Wu brothers checked in regularly, helping with tasks that required multiple hands. They never made Mara feel inadequate or weak, just quietly adjusted to take on more load. Matthew Cross brought his wife Sarah to visit, a round, cheerful woman who'd raised 4 children and had endless practical advice about pregnancy and infants. "Don't listen to the horror stories," Sarah told Mara firmly during one visit. "Every woman's got a tale about terrible births and endless crying and no sleep. They're not lying, but they're not telling the whole truth either. Because yes, it's hard. Yes, you'll be exhausted. But the first time that baby looks at you, really sees you, and knows you're their whole world, nothing compares, nothing." "I hope you're right," Mara said quietly. "I am right. Trust me." "And you've got Ethan, which is more than a lot of women have. A partner who actually gives a damn makes all the difference." After Sarah left, Mara was thoughtful. "Do you think I give you enough credit," she asked Ethan, "for staying, for all of this?" "You don't need to give me credit. I'm exactly where I want to be." "But still, you could have left 100 times. Could have taken that reward money and disappeared. Built a life somewhere else without a pregnant wife and a struggling ranch tying you down." "Stop." Ethan pulled her close. "You're not tying me down. You're holding me up. There's a difference. Everything good in my life right now exists because you're in it. The ranch, the home, the future, the baby. None of it means anything without you at the center of it. So stop acting like you're some burden I'm nobly carrying. You're my partner, my wife, and the love of my life. Start believing that." She was quiet for a long moment, then whispered, "I'm trying. It's just hard to undo 30 years of believing I wasn't worth staying for. Then I'll spend the next 30 years proving otherwise, however long it takes." As winter gave way to early spring, Mara's pregnancy became impossible to hide. Her belly rounded visibly, and she felt the baby move for the first time in late March, a flutter she initially mistook for indigestion until it happened again and again, unmistakable proof of life within her. "Ethan, give me your hand," she said urgently one evening. She pressed his palm against her stomach. "Wait for it. Just wait." He felt it a moment later, a tiny push against his hand, barely perceptible but definitely there. His child. Moving, living, real. The emotion that surged through him was so powerful it nearly buckled his knees. "That's our baby," Mara said, watching his face. "That's our child saying hello." "Hello," Ethan whispered to her belly, feeling foolish and not caring at all. "We're your parents, and we can't wait to meet you." The movement came again, stronger this time, and Mara laughed with delight. They spent the next hour like that, hands on her stomach, feeling their child move and kick and announce its presence to the world. April brought warmer weather and the start of spring calving season. Despite Mara's protests, Ethan insisted she stay in the house while he handled the overnight watches in the barn. 3 calves were born in the first week, all healthy, and the sense of renewal was palpable across the ranch. New life, new beginnings, everything green and growing. Sheriff Dalton rode out in mid-April with unexpected news. "Got a telegram for you," he said, handing Ethan a folded paper. "From the territorial governor himself." Ethan unfolded it and read aloud. "To Ethan and Mara Cole, your actions in defending your property against the Rourke gang have been officially recognized by the territory. In appreciation for your service to public safety, I hereby grant you clear title to all adjacent land previously held by the territory, totaling an additional 480 acres. This land is yours free and clear to build upon and prosper. Congratulations and best wishes. Governor Harrison Mitchell. Mara, who'd come out onto the porch at the sound of visitors, gasped. That's the northern section, the good grazing land with the creek running through it. Father tried to buy that for years but could never afford it. It's yours now, Sheriff Dalton said with satisfaction. Governor wanted to do something tangible to thank you. Figured land was better than a medal. You've now got one of the larger ranches in this part of the territory. After the sheriff left, Ethan and Mara walked to the northern boundary of their original property and looked out over the land that was now theirs. It stretched for miles, rolling hills dotted with early spring grass, a creek cutting silver through the green. We could run twice the cattle, Mara said, her voice awed. Maybe even horses. There's enough water and grazing for both. This changes everything, Ethan. This makes us not just surviving, but actually successful. Your father would be proud. I think he would. And I think, she paused, emotional. I think he'd like knowing his grandchild will inherit something worth having, a real legacy, not just a failing dream. Ethan pulled her close, careful of her pregnant belly. We're building that legacy together. Your father started it, but we're finishing it, making it into something that'll last generations. Generations, she repeated softly. I like the sound of that. May arrived with unseasonable heat, and Mara's discomfort increased proportionally. She was huge now, her belly seemingly too large for her frame, and movement had become difficult. Doc Morrison checked her regularly and pronounced everything normal, but normal didn't make it comfortable. I'm done, she announced one particularly hot afternoon, lowering herself carefully into a chair on the porch. Just done. This baby needs to come out now. I'm serving eviction notice. Doesn't work that way, Ethan said, bringing her a glass of cold water. It should. Whoever designed this system didn't think it through. Pretty sure the design is beyond our control. Then the designer is fired. Despite her discomfort, Mara remained involved in the ranch operations, directing from the porch or the house, making decisions about which pastures to rotate, when to bring in the farrier, what supplies they'd need for summer. Her mind was as sharp as ever, even if her body was temporarily not her own. On the third Thursday in May, Mara woke Ethan at 2 a.m. with a hand on his shoulder and controlled panic in her voice. It's time, she said. The baby's coming, right now. Ethan was on his feet instantly, fighting off sleep fog. Are you sure? Doc Morrison said first babies usually take a while. I'm sure. My water broke and the contractions are already close together. This baby isn't waiting. He dressed in record time while helping Mara into a clean nightgown. I'll ride for Doc Morrison. Tom Brennan's wife lives closer. I'll get her to come sit with you while You're not leaving me. Mara's grip on his arm was iron. If this baby comes before the doctor gets here, I need you with me. Send someone else for Morrison. Wake Matthew. He's staying in the barn loft helping with the cattle. He can ride to town. Ethan did exactly that, rousing Matthew and sending him racing toward Dry Hollow while he returned to Mara. He found her pacing the bedroom, one hand on the small of her back, breathing through a contraction that bent her double with its intensity. How bad? He asked, hovering uselessly. Bad, really bad, but normal, I think. Sarah said it would feel like dying, and she wasn't exaggerating. The contraction passed and Mara straightened. How long until the doctor? Hour, maybe 90 minutes, depending on how fast Matthew rides and whether Morrison is home. That might be too long. Then we do this ourselves. You tell me what you need, and I'll do it. Whatever it takes. Over the next 45 minutes, Ethan learned more about childbirth than he'd ever wanted to know. Mara's contractions came harder and closer together. She couldn't lie down, couldn't sit still, could only pace and grip his hands and breathe through wave after wave of pain that seemed impossible to endure. I can't do this, she gasped at one point. I can't. It's too much. Yes, you can. You're the strongest person I know. You fought off 10 armed outlaws. You can do this. That was easier. I could shoot outlaws. Can't shoot a baby. Probably for the best. She laughed despite herself, then groaned as another contraction hit. Doc Morrison finally arrived just before dawn, taking in the situation with experienced eyes. Looks like this little one is eager. How far apart are the contractions? 3 minutes, maybe less, Ethan said. And lasting how long? 60 seconds, sometimes more. Morrison nodded. Then we're close. Mara, can you get on the bed? I need to check your progress. What followed was the longest hour of Ethan's life. Mara labored with a determination that was both inspiring and heartbreaking to watch. The pain was clearly immense, but she bore it with the same stubborn resilience she brought to everything else. When Morrison finally said she could push, Ethan held her hand and murmured encouragement while she worked with everything she had to bring their child into the world. Almost there, Morrison said. One more big push. Give me everything you've got, Mara. She did. Ethan felt her grip his hand hard enough to leave marks, felt her entire body strain with effort, heard her cry out with exertion and pain and determination. And then a different cry filled the room, high and thin and unmistakably alive. It's a girl, Doc Morrison announced, holding up a tiny, squirming, blood-covered human who was clearly furious about being born. A healthy baby girl. Ethan stared at his daughter, unable to process that something so small and perfect existed. Morrison cleaned her quickly, wrapped her in a blanket, and placed her on Mara's chest. The baby immediately quieted, sensing her mother's heartbeat, and Mara's expression transformed into something beyond words. She's beautiful, Mara whispered, tears streaming down her face. Ethan, look at her. She's perfect. He looked, really looked, at the tiny face, the impossibly small fingers, the eyes that were trying to focus on this new, bright world, his daughter, his family, everything he'd never thought he'd have right here in his arms. What should we name her? Mara asked quietly. Ethan thought about it. About the journey that had brought them here, the fire and the fighting, the choice that had become love. Hope, he said finally. Let's call her Hope, because that's what she is, proof that even when things start impossible, they can become beautiful. Hope Cole, Mara tested. I love it. Perfect for our impossible, beautiful girl. Doc Morrison finished his work, declared both mother and baby healthy, and left them alone to rest. But neither Ethan nor Mara slept. They just lay together in the morning light streaming through the windows, their daughter between them, staring at her in wonder as she slept. We made her, Mara said softly. This tiny person is half you and half me, and entirely herself. I don't even have words for what that is. Miraculous, Ethan supplied. Terrifying. Perfect. All of those. Mara looked at him. Thank you. For what? For staying, for loving me, for giving me this. 6 months ago, I thought my life was over. No future, no hope, just slow decline into nothing. Now I have everything. A partner, a home, a daughter, a ranch that's thriving, all because you chose to stay instead of run. I told you before. It was the easiest choice I ever made. He stroked Hope's tiny cheek with one finger. And I'd make it again in a heartbeat. Word of Hope's birth spread quickly, and visitors began arriving by mid-afternoon. Tom and Matthew came with their wives, bearing gifts and congratulations. The Wu brothers brought a hand-carved cradle, beautiful in its simplicity. Sheriff Dalton rode out with word that the town was organizing a celebration. Even Silas Thorne appeared, looking at the baby with something almost like fondness. Town's got a future now, he said cryptically. Long as there's young ones being born and raised, there's hope. Funny you should say that, Ethan replied. Hope's her name. Silas smiled, a rare and genuine expression. Well chosen indeed. As spring turned to summer, life on the ranch settled into a new rhythm built around the baby. Hope was a relatively easy child, sleeping reasonably well and eating enthusiastically. But even easy babies required constant care. Ethan and Mara navigated parenthood the same way they'd navigated everything else. Together, figuring it out as they went, supporting each other through the exhausting early weeks. I understand now why women look so tired, Ethan said one morning after being up 3 times during the night. This is harder than fighting outlaws. And more rewarding, Mara added, cradling Hope while the baby nursed. Though I admit there are moments when shooting something sounds easier. They fell into patterns. Ethan handled the night feedings with milk Mara had expressed, letting her sleep. She managed the days while he worked the ranch, though he came in frequently to check on them both. They shared everything: the joy of Hope's first smile, the worry when she ran a slight fever, the exhaustion, and the triumph, and the overwhelming love that neither had expected to feel this intensely. By August, Hope was 3 months old and thriving. The ranch was thriving too. The additional land the governor had granted allowed them to expand their herd significantly. They'd hired 2 ranch hands, young men from town eager to learn the trade, which freed up Ethan's time to actually help with the baby instead of working dawn to dusk. One evening, with Hope asleep in her cradle and the ranch quiet around them, Ethan and Mara sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. "You know what I realized today? What?" Mara said, leaning against his shoulder. "What's that?" "I'm happy. Really genuinely happy. Not just surviving or making do, but actually happy. I don't think I've felt this way since before my mother died." "Me either. Probably ever. We built this, Ethan. Against every odd, despite everything that should have torn us apart, we built something real. Something that matters." "We did." He kissed the top of her head. "And we're not done building yet. This is just the beginning." "The beginning of what?" "Of everything. Our family, our legacy, our life together. Hope's just the first chapter." Mara turned to look at him. "Are you saying you want more children?" "Eventually, maybe, if you do. No rush, though. I'm pretty content with what we've got right now." "Me too, though I admit the idea of Hope having siblings someday is appealing. I was an only child, and it was lonely. I'd like better for her." "Then we'll give her better. Few years from now, when we're ready. For now, let's just enjoy this, the 3 of us, this place, this life we've built." As summer faded into autumn, the first anniversary of their forced marriage approached. Neither had forgotten the date. October 1st, the day Ethan had signed his name on that paper and bound himself to a woman he didn't know for reasons that had nothing to do with love. The night before their anniversary, Mara pulled out the original marriage certificate, now framed and hanging in their bedroom. She studied it thoughtfully. "What are you thinking?" Ethan asked. "That this piece of paper started as a prison sentence and became a promise. That sometimes the worst things lead to the best outcomes. That I wouldn't change a single thing about how we started, because it led us here. Not even the part where you were forced to marry a stranger at gunpoint? Not even that. Because that stranger became my husband, my partner, the father of my child, and the love of my life." She looked at him. "I want to do something tomorrow, something to mark the anniversary properly." "What did you have in mind?" "A real wedding. Nothing big or fancy, just us and Sheriff Dalton and maybe a few friends. I want to say vows that we actually mean, make promises we're choosing instead of ones that were forced on us. I want to marry you again, Ethan, for real this time." He pulled her close, emotion tight in his throat. "I'd like that. I'd like that a lot." The next day they stood in their front yard with Hope in Mara's arms and a small gathering of friends surrounding them. Sheriff Dalton officiated, but the words were theirs, simple and heartfelt and true. "I, Ethan Cole, choose you, Mara Whitlock Cole, as my wife and partner. I promise to stand with you, to fight for you, to build this life alongside you for as long as I breathe. You're my home, my heart, and my future. This I vow. I, Mara Whitlock Cole, choose you, Ethan Cole, as my husband and partner. I promise to stand with you, to fight for you, to build this life alongside you for as long as I breathe. You're my home, my heart, and my future. This I vow." They sealed it with a kiss while their friends cheered and Hope gurgled happily between them. It wasn't the wedding either had imagined as children, but it was perfect because it was real. It was earned. It was chosen. As the celebration continued around them, Ethan held Mara and their daughter and looked out over the land they'd fought so hard to keep. The ranch stretched in all directions, healthy and thriving, marked by new fences and full pastures and the promise of continued growth. The house stood solid and strong, built from the ashes of the old one, filled with love and laughter and all the chaotic beauty of family. This was what they'd built. This was what they'd chosen. Not a forced bond in a lawless town, but a partnership forged in fire and tempered in love. Not a sentence, but a life. Not an ending, but a beginning that stretched forward into a future bright with possibility. Tom Brennan raised a glass in toast. To Ethan and Mara Cole, the most stubborn, courageous, impossible couple I've ever known. May your love be as enduring as the land you work, and may your legacy echo through generations. To Ethan and Mara, the gathering chorused. As the sun set over the ranch, painting everything in golden light, Ethan and Mara stood together with their daughter, surrounded by the community that had once forced them together and now celebrated what they'd become. They'd started as strangers, become partners, transformed into lovers, and ultimately built something neither could have created alone. Hope squirmed in Mara's arms, reaching for Ethan's face with chubby baby hands. He took her, settling her against his shoulder, feeling the solid weight of his daughter and the even more solid presence of his wife beside him. "You know what the best part is?" Mara asked quietly. "What's that?" "We get to do this every day. Wake up together, work together, raise our daughter together, build our future together. Every single day, we get to choose each other all over again." "And I choose you," Ethan said. "Today, tomorrow, every day forward. For the rest of my life, I choose you." "And I choose you," Mara echoed, taking his free hand. "Always and forever." They stood like that as darkness fell and stars emerged overhead. Three people where there had once been two strangers, a family where there had once been only obligation. The ranch lay quiet around them, waiting for tomorrow's work, content in the knowledge that good people tended it with love and determination. In the distance, cattle lowed softly. Closer, in the barn, horses settled for the night. The land breathed its ancient rhythm, unchanged by human drama but touched by human care. And in the house that had been built from ashes and hope, a family prepared for sleep, mother and father and daughter, bound together not by force but by choice, not by law but by love. The drifter had found his home. The forgotten woman had been seen and chosen. The ranch that had been dying now thrived with new life. And the forced marriage that should have been a tragedy had become the greatest love story either had ever known. Sometimes they would later tell their daughter, when she was old enough to understand, the best things in life start in the worst ways. Sometimes you have to walk through fire to find what you're really looking for. Sometimes a stranger becomes the most important person in your world, and a sentence becomes salvation. But always, always, the choice to stay, to fight, to love, makes all the difference. This was their story. This was their choice. This was their life, built together from nothing but determination and hope and the stubborn refusal to let circumstances define them. And it was, in every way that mattered, perfect. The end of one journey, the beginning of countless others. The conclusion of a forced bond, the start of a chosen forever. Two people, one life, infinite possibilities stretching forward into tomorrow and all the tomorrows after that. Together, always together. That was how their story ended and how their real life began.